University of Calgary, who normally co-chair these webinars with me. Thanks to them for the background work that they're doing as well. The Sikh and Punjab Studies webinar is one component of a multi-pronged project, which includes the academic journal Sikh Formations and several new initiatives that have been developed over the past 2 years, a dedicated blog, podcast, and this webinar series. The webinar itself has several main objectives. Firstly, to connect scholars and students across different disciplines and in Sikh and Punjab studies to widen access to research in this rapidly growing field, especially to artists, journalists, and also to the wider community. As people continue to join us over the next few minutes, I'd like to make a quick announcement about the next event in this webinar series, which is a mini conference on the Indian partition. And we'll say more about that. It'll be in September this year. And if I can invite Alex to make a quick announcement about the Q&A function, I will then go and introduce our main host for today.
Hello, everyone. Before we formally begin our webinar today, I'd like to just briefly explain the formats. Your camera and microphones have been disabled, but we invite you to submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. After each session, after each speaker, Dr. Gurharpal Singh or Dr. Mandair will hopefully, and if it is appropriate, take these questions and provide them to the speakers to elaborate a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. With that, I'd like to turn to our program today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Professor Gurharpal Singh, who is the initiator and main organizer of today's event. Gurharpal Singh is Emeritus Professor of Sikh and Punjab Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. His publications include The Partition of India, 2009, Sikhs in Britain, The Making of a Community, 2006, Ethnic Conflict in India, published in 2000, and most recently, the book Sikh Nationalism, From a Dominant Minority to an Ethno-Religious Diaspora, published with Cambridge University Press. Gurharpal, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Alex, and a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm delighted that so many of the leading specialists on Punjab and Indian politics will be contributing to the webinar today. I won't take up much of the time in the introductions, except to say that we have probably witnessed one of the most extraordinary state elections in Punjab's history since the state was formed in 1996. The elections have been exceptional, not only because of the result, but also because many seasoned analysts got the verdict wrong. The polls were, for once, almost right. The ruling Congress party went into self-destruction mode before the polls, and the main regional party, the Akali Dal, was wiped out. And perhaps most importantly, the elections were held against the backdrop of the pandemic and the farmers' agitation. So we have three panels today, one at looking at the expectations and the results and the data, the first panel. And then the second one looking at the result, at the campaign and the poll in much more detail. And finally, we will all come together to discuss the long-term or the implications of the results, both for Punjab and Indian politics. So in the first session, we have 4 speakers, and I introduce the first, and it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Professor James Manor. He is Emeritus Professor of Commonwealth Studies at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London. James is a former director of the Institute, and for the last 40 years has been the leading political scientist working on India in the UK. I will now invite James, who has followed the election campaign in Punjab closely, to share some of his observations on the campaign, how it went, and the result. James, you have 10 to 12 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not sure you can see me. Can you hear me and see me? Okay. I will not need 10 to 12 minutes, I don't think. And the reason is that I'm not a specialist in the study of Punjab or its politics. I study India and its politics, but I do study state elections, the Congress party, other parties. So I do have a few vague ideas which may be helpful here. And I would like to ask my Punjab specialist colleagues whether they think that the result of this election, the remarkable victory of the Aam Aadmi Party, or AAP, was inevitable from the beginning. Would it have happened because young people were discontented or people were fed up with the old parties in the state? Would it have happened anyway, no matter what the other parties did? Or were the actions and the errors of other parties in the election campaign important and maybe contributed decisively to the result? I don't know the answer, but colleagues here will, I think, have better ideas since they've been deeper into Punjab politics for a long time. If the Aam Aadmi Party victory was not inevitable, I wonder if things that happened within the Congress party in Punjab contributed to it. They look at the Congress party's actions, the Congress party leaders' actions, look to me like political suicide. First, they ousted the sitting Congress chief minister of the state, Singh, and turned him against them, of course, and got his people against them as well, fragmenting the Congress base. Perhaps Singh was not terribly popular. Perhaps it was best that he not be leading the campaign, but it does look a strange decision. And then the Congress leaders in New Delhi, and we're talking about three people: Sonia Gandhi, her children Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Gandhi. The Congress leaders in New Delhi chose two other people to be important in the election campaign. The first was a new chief minister of Punjab, who they put in place, who was a member of the scheduled castes, or the Dalits. And it's conceivable that this was not a stupid decision. It's conceived because Punjab has a much larger proportion of Dalits in the population than any other state in India. So there are lots of votes there to attract, potentially. So the choice of the Dalit chief minister might have been logical. It might not have been nutty. But then they made a second decision, which was clearly completely nutty. They chose Navjot Singh Sidhu as the president of the state Congress organization, the PCC president. And Mr. Sidhu has long been visibly an egomaniac, completely out of control, who is so possessed by his own importance and his own appetites that he will do anything to do down everybody else and every institution that stands in his way, and he will be a destructive force. Mr. Sidhu is the loosest of loose cannons in politics, and that's saying something because there are plenty of other loose cannons scattered around the Indian political system. And Mr. Sidhu's behavior during the election campaign, obviously trying to undermine the chief minister from his own party, obviously trying to grab attention on which he's desperately thrives, and to grab power within the Congress party, were hugely destructive. So that after the election, one of the Congress Party's senior leaders outside Punjab, who is actually an MP from Punjab, Manish Tiwari, who's a sensible and perceptive man, said that Sidhu's behavior during the election campaign was so obnoxious and destructive that Sidhu became the biggest enemy of the Congress Party in Punjab. So the state level leader of the Congress Party, installed by the Congress leaders in New Delhi, the family, became the biggest enemy of their party. And this was entirely predictable for anyone that had watched Mr. Sidhu's antics, egomaniac antics on television for years, could have told them. It should have been obvious, but the leadership in New Delhi didn't see it, which raises serious questions about their competence to lead the Congress Party nationally. In particular, Mr. Sidhu seems to have obtained his high position and to have been given such prominence in the campaign because he was personally close to the daughter of Sonia Gandhi, that is Priyanka Gandhi, something of a newcomer to politics alongside her brother Rahul. And what we now have, there are implications of this that go far beyond Punjab, because the Congress Party in India generally is in very serious trouble. Congress Party is a marginal force, an utterly unimportant force in Indian states, which return almost half of the members of parliament at national elections. So it's kind of a cipher across nearly half of India. And it's in terrible trouble, losing its power base in the state of Maharashtra, which is India's second largest state. And if the Congress becomes marginal and ceases to have any hope of not only power at the state level, but members of parliament in national elections in Maharashtra, then the Congress Party will in fact be completely unimportant in over half of the states, over half of India, in the more than half of India, which sends more than half of the members of parliament to the national parliament every 5 years. What we have now atop the Congress Party is a triumvirate. It used to just be one person, Sonia Gandhi, the mother, but now it's Sonia plus Rahul, her son, plus Priyanka, the daughter. And these three people can all be appealed to by congressmen for support in Punjab or any other state. Now, this change to a triumvirate is very dangerous for Congress, because Congress, ever since Mrs. Indira Gandhi destroyed the democratic system within Congress and set about encouraging bitter factional fights in every Indian state in order to dominate it with one person rule. Since then, the Congress in every state of India has suffered very serious factional fighting. It is a zoo. It's chaotic. And the only way this party can move forward with any kind of cohesion is for a single leader at the top of the party to make unquestioned decisions and impose unquestioned order upon the chaos which is Congress. Now, when you move from a single leader atop the Congress organization to a triumvirate, then you open the door to the chaos from below, embracing things higher up. And this could mean, if it persists, that the Congress Party is on a hiding to nothing and is not entirely doomed, because there are still a few states where Congress has some substance, but where it is relegated to the margins of politics nationally as well as at the state level. And this at a time when the current Indian government is seeking to impose an authoritarian order on the country and has made great progress in doing so. let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We will, I forgot to mention, we will take questions at the end of the presentations in this panel. And can I encourage panelists and those attending to set their, to note down their questions in the question and answer session. Question and answer prompt. Our next speaker is Professor Surinder Singh Jodhka. He's Professor of Sociology in the Center for Study of Social Systems at JNU, New Delhi. Surinder specializes on social stratification, development studies, social identities, and religious minorities in India. He has published prolifically and with distinction, his most recent contribution being on the farmers' movement in the Journal of Peasant Studies. I now invite Surinder to give his thoughts on the election, the expectation before and the outcome. Surinder, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Gurharpal. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Sikh Formations, for asking me to be part of this discussion. My assertions are kind of going to be tentative and rather loud, and they go beyond electoral politics, because I'm not a political scientist. Maybe I think differently from political scientists, but they do obviously connect with what is happening in Punjab and particularly the electoral outcome. And as Gurharpal, you have rightly pointed out, these are extraordinary elections and these are extraordinary results. And I think we need to kind of decode this extraordinariness of these elections. This is not something that doesn't happen in Indian politics. In Punjab last time, at some level, the way Congress won, people had not expected, but that time it was not extraordinary. Punjab has also had traction for AAP. AAP is not completely new to Punjab. Many people say that if Hindu vote had not shifted to Congress in the last 1 week or less than a week, last time also AAP would have won. And AAP sent 4 MPs to Parliament in 2014 when they could not elect even 1 MP from Delhi, where it was in power. In the last 2019 elections, again, they could not win a single MP from Delhi, where it had huge majority in the state assembly, but Punjab managed to send 1 MP to the 2019 Parliament. So I think one should also kind of contextualize what is happening in Punjab. And this victory of AAP is definitely extraordinary. We had expected, there was a possibility right from the beginning that AAP could be in the running, and there were chances that it would win. But we always thought that there would be competition between Congress and AAP, and AAP might win, but Congress could also win. That was the kind of, initially many people thought. So I think one should recognize that Punjab for quite some time has been in the process of what one could broadly describe as churning, a word that is used in Indian electoral politics by political scientists very frequently. And Punjab's churning in some sense is delayed. There was churning in Indian politics or regional politics, which started in 1980s and 90s. We saw emergence of different kind of politics, Dalit politics in UP, OBC politics in Bihar, and many other regions. These churnings have been taking place in Indian democracy, but Punjab at some level was not really part of that churning. The whole political scenario of Punjab was divided between Congress and Akalis, and they both were in some sense citadels of the landed elites of Malwa. All these were Jat Sikhs and big land holdings, and they more or less, most of them came from Malwa, even though they had their influence across the state. So the class composition of political class was very, in some sense, similar, whether it is Amrinder or Badal or anyone else. They all came from the same stock, and some people also count number of families. So it is in that sense that this election is certainly extraordinary, even though this current chief minister also is a Jat Sikh and from Malwa region, but he doesn't belong to that kind of class. And the people who kind of are part of his kind of larger group, they also have different kind of identities, different kinds of backgrounds. No, what is the churning? How does one decode this churning? I think if you look at Punjab narrative, ever since 1980s, I've been hearing only negative things about Punjab. It's rarely that you get to hear positive things about Punjab after the great success of Green Revolution, where Punjab was the top state in India in terms of per capita income. But after that, Khalistan movement, and then you have drugs, you have Green Revolution itself getting into cancer kind of revolution, or whatever you like to call it, youth unemployment, migrations of different kind, creating all kinds of crises, mafias ruling the roost. So all these were at some level negative news. And at some level, I think the positive news from Punjab, or the positive vibe, rather than news, comes with the farmers' movement. When in 2021, farmers land up in Delhi and they come with a kind of different idiom and different kind of color. And that, I think, was something different and something new. And that is something, in some senses, unfolding itself. One can say Basanti Rang itself is Basanti color, the yellow pagadi turban that the chief minister ties, and everyone else is encouraged to tie. I think one of Satnam was also tying a yellow turban today. So Basant is also at some level a positive moment in the annual cycle, when new leaves sprout, and one is hoping for a different kind of cropping season to arrive. So Basant in Punjab is very, very kind of positive moment, and it kind of brings you a change in mood when you get out of the cold and suddenly you see weather is changing. So I think there is something very, very symbolic about this moment, both in terms of what is happening in Punjab and what is happening in the larger kind of society, not only in politics. So I think how does one decode it? I think there are a couple of 3-4 points that I'll make, and then I'll stop. First, I think the most important point that comes out from this election is a very significant decline of the traditional Panthik politics. The present-day Punjab came into being in 1966 as an outcome of Punjabi Subha movement, and Punjabi Subha movement was a Sikh Panthik movement. This was started by Akalis and of different kinds, and it was around question of Sikh religious identity, not just community identity, and that, in some sense, is undergoing a major reconfiguration. I would not say decline, but it definitely is undergoing a major reconfiguration. Akali Dal's defeat, and it's also Chathitar of Akal Takht has commented on it, that it's not good for Sikhs. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but certainly something major has happened. This is one of the most critical moments for Panthik politics in the post-1966 Punjab, and this would, I think, perhaps invite several PhD dissertations on what it does to Punjab. What has made this possible? I think that's going to be one of my main points. And I think there are 3-4 points that made it possible. First of all is that Shiromani Akali Dal, which is Badal Akali Dal, very systematically delegitimized itself, and delegitimized itself when it was in power. It did all kinds of strange things, apart from, the Badal family taking over the party. It also became a kind of mafia of some kind, where they would get into all kinds of business themselves, and then they were using state resources to kind of divert to their own personal income, whether it is sand mafia or transport and all those things that people began to talk about. And along with that, there has been very interesting decline of, even though Punjab never had communalism of the kind that you have had in kind of other parts of the country, but Punjab did have a kind of communal narrative between Sikh and Hindu, and that also has significantly, I think, subsided. We don't talk about Arya Samaj any longer. We don't talk about Hindu Mahasabha any longer. Not that they are completely absent, but they are not aggressively present. So the Hindu communal politics, which kind of began to take shape during the partition period, before partition period, has significantly, in some sense, become quieter in Punjab for sure, if it has not declined. I think there's also a significant generational shift. If you look at the people who report Punjabi as their language, their number has significantly increased. There's no politics generally around the language of Punjabi. That again, I think, is a very significant development. A related point, which I think again is something which needs more thinking, but my hypothesis is that increasingly Sikhi is emerging as a hegemonic regional culture. Now, these two things go simultaneously. Decline of Panthik politics makes Punjabi politics less defensive, the regional Hindu politics less defensive. And at the same time, there's a much more acceptance of the Sikhi idiom. I would make a distinction between Sikhism as a religion and Sikhi as a culture. Sikhi as a culture is more kind of regional in nature, because the main component of Sikhi would be Punjabi language, Sikh institutions. It borrows a lot from Sikhism, but it is not synonymous with Sikhism. And I saw lots of Hindu journalists. I mean, they are Sharma by name, but they would start their lectures on the farmers' border by saying Bole Soneal and starting with Wah Guru Ji Ka Khalsa, Wah Guru Ji Ki Fateh, without any hesitation, and it was very genuine, coming from their heart. And this is something which is very interesting that one needs to take note of, and is perhaps the most important aspect. Caste politics, again, is a very important point that this election tells us something about. As Jim had earlier talked about, that everybody talked about this caste politics and how Congress played a masterstroke. Congress was not the only party that was talking about caste. It started with Aap promising Dalit as Deputy Chief Minister, then Akali is entering in alliance with BSP, and then Congress thought that this was the only route to take. But there's a complete sociological misunderstanding of caste dynamics in Punjab. Caste is not absent in Punjab. Punjab is not a Brahminical region. And as I said, Sikhi is not a casteist idiom, and that has its own implications. But 32% is a complete misnomer. There are 2-3 different communities, which are large communities, which would have been in ST list if Punjab had an ST list. So all those are included in scheduled caste list. And within them, again, the kind of difference that you have in different clusters of communities in Punjab does not exist anywhere else. Punjab was the first state to institutionalize subclassification of scheduled castes in 1970s when Zail Singh was the chief minister. I'll wind up in next 1 or 2 minutes. So I think to say that caste has not played a role in this election, I would say that is perhaps not true. Again, the way, in some sense, the moment Channi became face of Congress party, people stopped talking about caste, including Congress stopped talking about caste, so that a Dalit should not. And this is a very common thing. Whenever you bring Dalit as chief ministerial candidate, there would be counter polarization of non-Dalit castes. Whether that has happened in Punjab or not is an empirical question. But that's something, increasingly people were talking about corruption and stuff like that. And that kind of became a kind of liability for Congress rather than being an asset. So caste does not work in these officialized clusterings of groupings as scheduled castes. Caste works in Zat politics. And in Doaba, perhaps if you go, the cluster from which Channi himself comes, they would have got more votes. BSP perhaps would have gotten lesser votes. That would be my tentative guess, but I think this again needs empirical kind of evidence and study. My last point is that Punjab election is not going to be only election for Punjab. It has national implications, and as I think Jim has already pointed out, there are several of them. I'll just list 2 or 3 of them. First of all, obviously, it would be important moment for AAP. In the history of Indian democratic politics, AAP becomes the 4th party after Congress, BJP, and I think Communist CPM to have government in more than one state. So in some sense, Punjab AAP has already entered the next phase. Delhi is not really a full state, but now AAP has its government in two states. And it is the moment where it will have to reinvent itself as not just being a party of Arvind Kejriwal. It will have to work out a federal model. What kind of relationship it's going to have in Punjab, and Channi is this new chief minister has already been hinting at that we will learn from Delhi, and Delhi would also learn from us. And that is something which is a very, very different kind of thinking and talking. Punjab is a much bigger state. I mean, not that in terms of population is very, very big from Delhi, but it's a substantive state. In Delhi, even police does not come under AAP, and there is central government present, and it's a very nominal kind of government. Punjab is a substantial middle-sized state, and that would kind of have implications for AAP's politics, AAP's federal model, but it would also have implication for AAP in many other possible positive ways, in the sense that in neighboring states, for example, perhaps in Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, perhaps AAP can begin to think of itself as a viable model, and it would go, if Punjab becomes a kind of success story, then again it would be another appeal. And finally, my final point is about Congress party. And I think if Congress fails to learn lessons from its terrible mistakes in Punjab, then it has no future. That would be my kind of indication. And this is something which is kind of so completely open book. If they don't read this, they can't read anything. I mean, Sidhu was openly saying that, if I don't become the leader of Congress party, eat se eat baja denge, I will destroy everything. And that's what he did. He destroyed everything, and he did it very, in some sense, Jim has already said that. So I think for Punjab, it is a kind of interesting, quote unquote, positive moment, in the sense that there is a sense in which Punjab is looking at itself very differently. And I think we should recognize these things, whether we kind of as objective observers. So all those kind of axes of Punjabi society, Punjabi politics, Punjabi culture have been opened up once again, and they are being re-articulated. They were perhaps already happening from ground, and farmers' movement, I think, has played a very, very critical role in articulating that kind of energy in a positive direction. And then again, culture of shahidis, and that we have to fight, we have to do something for our country, and Punjabi music, the way it participated in that moment. I think culturally it's a very important and interesting moment for Punjab. In which direction does it go? One doesn't really know. One will have to wait and watch. But it's a very, very interesting moment. Thank you very much for letting me speak all my time.
Thank you, Surinder, for a wonderful overview. We could go on, and I've had a request that we open up for brief questions at least. We can have questions at the end, all of them, but I have one question from Ashutosh, which if you could answer briefly. He argues or asks, can you say something about whether the power of the Hindus in Punjab has ceased since the creation of the Punjabi Suba, especially in political terms? Can you say something about that, and how does that fit in with your analysis?
Certainly not. But again, quite like the scheduled caste demographics, Hindu demographics is also wrongly estimated. We generally divide Punjab into Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, and Sikhs being nearly 60% and Hindu being nearly 40%, 2% either, and that goes to Muslim and Christian population. That's not true at all. See, the Hindu, so-called Hindu population, which is religiously, demographically enumerated as Hindu, is not all Hindu. For example, our Dharma population entirely, Ravidasis, they would not even call themselves Hindus. They would say we are Adharmis or we are Ravidasis, and their number is substantial, at least 10 to 15% in Punjab. So if you take them out, already you have Hindu population coming down to a significant extent. So the main Hindu, quote unquote, communal vote bank in Punjab is around, in my estimation, anything between 10 to 20%, right? It could be around 9%. It could also be around 14, 15%. And if you look at the vote base of Punjab, of BJP, and these are the urban trader, upper caste Hindus. And my own feeling is that even within them, there is a significant churning taking place. And they don't have any problem in accepting Sikhi as the cultural idiom. They have had problems with certain kind of Panthik politics, but I think Punjabi Hindu is embedded in Nanak's region. And there's a larger regional culture of Punjabi Hindu, which I think many people always connected. But demographically, once you have nationalism, it divided people. But on ground, I know lots of so-called Hindus who would list themselves as Hindus would only go to Gurudwaras. We'll do all kinds of rituals from Gurudwaras or Sikh rituals, but they are Hindus. They would call themselves Hindus. And these are the urban trading caste communities and different. So I think that kind of Punjabi culture, the movement has come where they can, in some sense, be more relaxed. And because of this lack of polarization, and perhaps it has something to do with the new confidence of BJP being in power at the national level. So the anxiety and insecurity that perhaps was felt, that has also gone. But they would remain.
I have two.
Yeah. They are urban, they are very rich, their economic position is very powerful. Their numbers matter, even if it is 20% or 15% or even 8%, it matters a lot.
I have two other questions. I'll hold on to them until the end because they could open up another line of argument. But before that, I'd like to move on to our speakers because I'm very keen to hear from them before we open up for discussion. Our third speaker is Professor Kumool Abbi from Chandigarh. She is Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology at Punjab University. Her research includes gender studies, development studies, popular culture, and social theory. So she has written previously for the blog of Sikh formations, and we're very much looking forward to her observations on the campaign and its result. The screen is yours.
Professor Gurharpal Singh, Professor Arvind-Mandair, Professor James Manor, Professor Surinder Jodhka, and Professor Sandeep Shastri. Well, it's very difficult to continue from where Surinder has ended on this note. And I'll try to carry this forward because he has given very interesting sociological insights. Now, the election result in Punjab has shot a very interesting surprise with the win of the Aam Aadmi Party in Punjab. Out of a total seats of 117, the AAP has garnered 92 seats, almost obliterating the Congress and the Akali Dal. There is a lot of interesting data which has come out from the election result. And as a sociologist, there are some issues which are good takeaways, which I would like to hint at. The first relates to the breakdown and delegitimizing of politics, which has been institutionalized for a long duration. It is the indictment of the political establishment, which played a key role in the victory of the Aam Aadmi Party. And people usually said the word akke hue, which is tired, with alternating political parties and their policies. The people of Punjab sought a new citizenship, which the AAP promised. The other relates to a breakdown of caste and class hierarchies in terms of the ruling class. We see a complete overthrow of the traditional ruling class of Punjab, which had been holding the state with tenacity since the formation of the Punjabi Suba. The Badals, the Kairos, the Royals, and all beaten the dust. The election has, through the churning going on in Punjab, capitulated the emergence of a new ruling class, which has emerged not from ancestry and entitlement, but through struggle and achievement. I feel one should see it as an assertion of the Punjabi middle class and lower middle class, both rural and urban, to seek a space for themselves in the electoral process. It is the middle class which has responded to the development agenda and Delhi model of AAP. It has been concerned with issues of employment, reforms, governance, corruption, honesty, and the future of the younger generation. Thus seeking a solution to the abysmal mess in which the state finds itself. The crisis of agriculture leading to environmental degradation, decline in productivity, the need for crop diversification to overcome problems created by over-reliance on rice, wheat cultivation, growing gap between crop yield and employment generation, problems of marketing, and the failure of procurement prices to keep up with the rising costs of inputs of labor, fragmentation of holdings, and farmers' suicides are some of the issues. And on the other hand, the youth who are educated are now constrained with limited options to migrate abroad. They are faced with restrictive employment chances, dwindling opportunities in the public and private sector, and closed opportunities for social mobility. It is this hope which has led to a cross-section of society voting for AAP. And I think the recent CSDS data which has come out also corroborates these points. The second important factor which has contributed to the success of the Aam Aadmi Party, as Surinder has already discussed, is the impact of the farmers' agitation. It's very difficult to imagine how the farmers' agitation, which became a matter of life and death for Punjabis, suddenly fizzled out as an election issue. I think this is something very interesting. It fizzled out as an election issue, and the farmers' leaders who tried to enter electoral politics, they also completely fizzled out. It can be, of course, discussed at another time, but it left a deep impact on the people culturally, sociologically, emotionally, and psychologically. The most important related to the participation in a long struggle leading to a rise in the level of consciousness and political awareness, which has, of course, been discussed. The other issue which I would like to talk about is the success of the farmers' movement, which required the emergence and alignment of a new social coalition. The Jat Sikhs, who were big landlords and large farmers, had to seek out the small, medium, and marginal farmers. It required the moneylenders, aratiyas, to align with the farmers for the survival of both, which brought together the interests of the rural and urban elite and middle class. Similarly, the success of the movement also required the support of the workers, farm laborers, etc., as it depended on agriculture for their survival, and if one failed, the other would be equally hit. It is this social coalition which continued to play an important role in electoral choices and transcended the calculations of caste, religion, and region. This broadening of horizon effectively ended the dhara or faction system, an indispensable part of Jat Sikh politics. The second major impact of the farmers' movement was the new orientation in the acceptance of Arvind Kejriwal, the chief minister of Delhi, as a man of Haryanvi origin, seeking ek mauka, one chance from Punjab. The support that the Punjab farmers drew from Haryana and Western UP as the agitation moved to Delhi borders played a very crucial role in broadening the outlook and removing the long-standing rivalry and suspicion between the two states. Haryana's support to the movement, both logistically and morally, became very crucial for the Punjab farmers. In their cultural idiom, Haryana began to be seen as a Chota Veer or Chota Bhai, younger brother. The second important role was played by Rakesh Tikait, whose tears and a stroke revived the movement, which suffered immense damage on 26 January 2021. Tikait is already been christened as a Surma, that is a brave one. He spoke up firmly for the Sikhs, and his statement was very popular, where he says that the Sikhs are a brave community, we will not tolerate them being insulted, and dug in his heels at the Ghazipur border. Ravinder Gariwal's song explained this, ke chad gayi fir gaddi us track te, morche te jaan pa gayi atru Tikait de. Now the train is back on track. The tears of Tikait have given a new lease of life to the morcha. Similarly, the sympathetic treatment shown by the Punjab farmers by the Aam Party in Delhi, not giving them Barari grounds, providing the water supply, sympathetic visits by Aap leadership were important. As one leader had pointed out, Aap leader, we had nothing to lose as we were only capable of providing lip sympathy. All these factors contributed to the emergence of a new kind of axis around Delhi, which was in complete contrast to Modi's Delhi, often addressed with contempt as Diliye or Delhi Rani, almost as an offensive affront. It is very ironical, while the agitation was being fought at the Delhi borders, how the people of Punjab ended up voting up to power a party which was Delhi-centric and whose chief minister campaigner, Arvind Kejriwal, was the incumbent chief minister of Delhi. So these factors played a very important role in making Kejriwal acceptable to the people, which had not happened in 2017. The other important factor relates to the projection of Bhagwant Singh Mann as the chief minister, choice of Aap. Bhagwant Mann represents the image of the robust rustic Jat. He is often referred to as Bhagwant Bai, and Jata Damunda, Surinder has also discussed this, who carries with him the insight, wit, and humor to critique the system. He is referred to as a person who has the capacity to raise his voice on a very important issues. A person who is dabang, that is the image, he has a fearless, and who raised mudde thok ke, who raised issues and almost hammered them in a forthright manner. Similarly, it is also emphasized that he rose like a lion and is not scared of anyone in the Lok Sabha. A popular song played at most of his rallies is Tere yaar nu daban nu firde, but dabda kithe hai. They want to make your yaar a pushover, but he cannot be suppressed. So this image was contrasted with Chavni, who was considered a stooge of the Congress High Command. And what endeared Bhagwant Mann systematically was his humanism, ordinariness, honesty, and simple lifestyle. Here I would like to mention two important icons of Punjabi society whose posters are generally found next to each other in the bazaar art. These are Sant Bhindranwale and Shahid Bhagat Singh. And the farmers' protest has played a very important role in reviving the cult of Bhagat Singh. And in continuity with Bhagwant Mann, has always worn a basanti turban and sought his inspiration from Bhagat Singh. And this is a symbolism of it. Connected with this has been the role of the popular protest music in creating and making people aware of this exploitation done by the traditional parties. In most songs, the political parties are referred to in terms of objects of ridicule, particularly the Akalis and the Congress. Chitte bagle te nile more, ajkal kithe ud gaye ne. Where have the white turbans and the blue turbans disappeared? Similarly, there was another very popular song by Tarsim Jassar, which said, Fix hoya match hai, Tivaro vari jitte. It's a fixed match and they win alternatively. Here, two important singers played a very important role in creating this awareness and consciousness. That was Babbu Maan and Kanwar Garewal. Both highlighted in their songs the seasonal nature of the politicians, particularly their presence at the end of 5 years period and of treating people as vote banks. Kanwar Garewal consistently drilled the point among the electorate: do not waste your vote, do not sell your vote for liquor and money, Your vote is invaluable. Do not forget what happened at the Delhi borders. The harsh winters, the oppressive summers, those for whom you voted, they never stood by you ever. The other important aspects relates to the fact that the Punjab election in 2022 was the first digital election in the COVID era. So most of the rallies were addressed digitally, and social media became very important. And the emphasis was on door-to-door campaigning, which was AAP's forte, and it turned it into an advantage. Similarly, the AAP campaign hit the bullseye. And as some voters commented, Sadi Dukti Rag Chedti, it picked our raw nerves. The first part of the campaign was creating a mission for everyone in Punjab. Asi Punjab bachana hai, we have to save Punjab. And the second related to the discourse of being looted, or how the lutere, plunders, were stripping away from Punjab through the mafias, sand, gravel, cable, transport, and drugs, which contrasted with the Khali Khazana, empty coffers, which were used as a pretext to suppress the strikes of contractual teachers, the ANMs, ASHA workers, the nurses, auxiliary midwives, etc. Interestingly here, the Akali campaign against the Congress, Thugs of Punjab, which exposed one corrupt congressman every day, ended up benefiting not the Akalis, but the AAP. So the party leaders remained focused on three main points, that is Badalav, change. Second, ek mauka aap nu, give one chance to AAP. Third, sub, dekh liya hai, is baar sanu bhi mauka do. You have seen all this, give us a chance, and the Delhi model. So here, in comparison, the Congress party campaign fell way off the mark. It was disconnected, unreal, and upper class. For example, the Congress party made spoofs from the Hollywood film Avengers Infinity War, projecting Charanjit Chani as Thor, destroying the opponents with a Stormbreaker, Rahul Gandhi as Hulk, Sunil Jakar as Groot, Navjot Sidhu as Captain America, Pratap Bajwa as Black Panther, Modi and Kejriwal as the two villains. So the AAP campaign, on the whole contrary, used traditional folk idioms, sayings, and imaginative cartoons and spoofs. They relied on the Punjabi style of songs known as Do Gane, where a husband and wife are in conversation with each other to build up the atmosphere for AAP victory. It was very clear, is baar na khavange dhoka, Bhagwant maan te Kejriwal nu devange mauka. We will not be fooled this time. Here, the election symbol of broom happened to be the right symbol, which peaked at the right time. The broom is associated, particularly in our Indian families, the broom is associated with cleaning out the mess, the cobwebs, and throwing out the dirt of the house. In this way, purging oneself of all impurities. Here, the symbol and the party became more important than the individual. Unlike the Congress and the Akalis, who were personality-based and did not have any agenda or issues, and this has also been pointed out by Surinder, it was the AAP setting the agenda for elections, first by announcing that they would have a deputy chief minister. The Akalis and the BSP, they formed an alliance. Similarly, Congress went outdid others by saying that they will have a chief minister who's a Dalit. Similarly, they first declared the chief minister candidate, which was not done by the other parties. Now, the other last factor which I would talk about, the other most important factor, which is very significant, relates to a very new rejection of consumerism by the Punjabi society. The struggle at the Delhi borders, living together, simple values, community living made the society, which had begun to valorize consumption culture after the Green Revolution, to value simplicity, honesty, truth, and a palpable feeling of silent Marxist wave, which has been latent for decades, became apparent. Then a lot has interesting data has emerged highlighting the declining role of caste and religion as well as the voter preferences. And Punjab is, of course, a much more complex issue and needs to be analyzed closely. One of the factors for the AAP victory could also be seen in terms of prospects of long-term advantage through complex benefits such as job, education, healthcare, etc., as seen in the successful Delhi model. This can be best illustrated with the example of the failure of the Congress Dalit Chief Minister, Charanjit Singh Channi. Among the Hindu essays, the share of the Congress party fell from 42 percentage points, which I think Professor Shastri will do in detail, but I'll just mention a bit that among the Hindu essays, the share of the Congress party fell from 42 percentage points in 2017 to 32 in 2022, while the AAP gained from 25 percentage points to 32. Similarly, among the Dalit Sikhs, the share of the Congress, which was 42 percentage points in 2017, fell to 27 in 2022, while the AAP share increased from 21 percentage points to 46. So these statistics highlight the disjunction with Chiranjit Channi, who was elevated to solace the vote bank of the Dalit community. And Professor Jodhka has already discussed many issues, but I'll just point out a couple of things. The focus on Channi's background was highlighted by Rahul Gandhi, who said, "Aap jante hain Channi ji ke papa kya karte the?" I mean, this shows how he is totally out of touch. This is complete contrast to the public declaration of assets of Chiranjit Channi to the tune of hundreds of crores and the raid of the Enforcement Directorate on his nephew perpetuated the general feeling of him being a fake Dalit who was part of the rot of the Congress. Along with that, Channi's attempt to keep himself popular with common people in terms of milking the cows or the goats, driving a bus or stringing a cot provoked a severe backlash, where it was felt that he was adhering to the stereotype of Dalits in Punjab and wanted them to remain stuck in a time wrap. Many Dalit voters commented that समय किथे दा किथे पहुंच गया है कि तुसी उते दे उते. Time has moved on and you are stuck in time. Channi faced a similar backlash over his remark on the Bhaiya not being allowed in Punjab and on calling Arvind Kejriwal a Kala Angrez. So there was a very interesting rejection of Channi. So this projection of him represented a community contrasted with the community's attempt to redefine itself and to realize their socio-economic and political aspirations. Similar interesting analysis can be looked at in terms of the voting patterns of the OBC 6, who voted overwhelmingly for AAP, then the voting patterns of the Jat 6 and the Punjabi Hindus, who would help break the stereotypes of caste and religious categories, which might need redefinition by the political scientists and others and the political parties which treat them as vote bank. So when there is a discussion, we can discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal, for a very comprehensive overview of the campaign. I'm sure some of the points that you've raised, we will follow through it at the end of this session and in session 3. I now move on to our final speaker for this session, Professor Sandeep Shastri. He is the Vice Chancellor of Lake City University, Bhopal. Most importantly for us, he's a psephologist, a political scientist, and a national coordinator of the Lake City network. He has published extensively and with colleagues is a regular contributor to major newspapers. I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Shastri because I remember it was almost 8 years ago when, with a number of other colleagues present today, we did a panel on the Lok Sabha elections at SOAS in 2014. Sandeep, it's your turn.
Thank you, Gurharpal ji, my fellow panelists and other distinguished participants in this very, very important seminar. Being the fourth speaker on the panel is always a challenge because you keep ticking off on your list what you wanted to say because it's already been said. And as the speakers were speaking, I realized of the 4 pages I had to tick off 3 pages, and I was wondering whether I would actually need my 10 minutes to say what I would want to say. I would be, as Gurharpal ji said, I would be reflecting on some of the findings which have emerged from the Lokniti post-poll survey in Punjab. Some of you may have already seen the 9 articles which appeared in the Hindu, which made an in-depth analysis of the results in Punjab. I would be making references to those articles and also referring to points which Jim made, which Professor Jodhka made as part of their presentations. I would like to start off by stating that while looking at the results in Punjab, while it was clearly a very handsome mandate for the Aam Aadmi Party, I would prefer to put that mandate as a backdrop because I think that mandate reflects a voter's categorical expression of discontent. The AAP benefited from a categorical expression of discontent of the voters of the Punjab. Now, That's the first point I would like to make, that if one is to look at this particular electoral verdict, it was a very, very visible expression of discontent with established political players. I think if you look at the way the top leadership of the Akali Dal was defeated in this election, if you see the way the top leaders of the Congress had to face a rout in this election, for me, that is a clear reflection of the discontent against established political players. And while talking of that discontent against established political players being transformed into a vote for the Aam Aadmi Party, I would also draw a word of caution which is needed at this stage, because we have now started hearing this talk about the 2024 Lok Sabha election having AAP playing a major role as a challenger to the BJP, the AAP emerging in the opposition space. All these questions have started coming up. All these discussions have started coming up. But I would suggest that we need to look at AAP's success in Punjab, keeping in mind points which friends have made. Their electoral debut in the Lok Sabha coming from Punjab in 2014 with 4 seats, winning 20 seats in the last assembly elections, retaining 1 seat in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. So what you see happening this time around is a result of efforts that have been on in the state for more than 8 years now. And when we talk about the similar experiment being repeated in the other parts of India, we need to ask ourselves that question, whether the situation, the context, the organization, the institutional dimensions is something which is available for parties like the AAP across the rest of the country. Now, having said that, let me also make the point that this discontent of the voter in Punjab was expressed on multiple counts. And all these multiple counts ultimately helped the AAP garner the type of majority they finally did. What would be the forms of this discontent? Discontent number 1, discontent writ large over the performance of both the state and central government. If you look at the Lokniti CSDS data, more than half the respondents said that they were fully dissatisfied with the central government. 6 out of 10 voters said we were fully dissatisfied with the state government. If I were to add these dissatisfied to the fully dissatisfied, the level of dissatisfaction with the central government goes up to 7 of every 10 voters. And with regard to the state government, it goes up to 3/4 of the respondents. Now, rarely have we seen such type of discontent against a central and state government in any election of the past. And I think this is something important to record. And not only was there discontent with the Congress-led state government and the BJP-led central government, there was also tremendous discontent with the local MLAs. Now, this provides a window of opportunity to explain as to why the AAP did so well in the Punjab elections. Just to give you another data point, 1/3 of the traditional voters of the Akali Dal and the Congress this time voted for the AAP. 1/3 of those who have traditionally voted for the Akali Dal and Congress this time became AAP voters, and 9 of 10 of those who voted for AAP earlier continued to vote for the AAP. So the important point to underline is the Shiromani Akali Dal and Congress could retain less than half of its traditional voters. And this again is this articulation of dissent that you find. Reference was made by Dr. Jodhka and Jim to the role of the farmers' agitation in the results that we finally had in Punjab. Again, if you look at our survey data, we find that if you look at those from farming households, especially in the Malwa region, more than half of those from farming households in the Malwa region voted for the Aap. 1/3 of those from farming communities, from farming households in the Majha region voted for Aap. And more than 1/4 of those who hailed from farming households in the Doaba region voted for Aap. So there is very clearly the fact, as demonstrated in our surveys, that those from farming households were in larger numbers those supporting the Aap in this election. I would also measure discontent in a third way, as seen in the Punjab result. This discontent against the central government of the BJP and the state government of the Congress was clearly seen across age groups, across educational levels, among both men and women, across class, across caste. One small difference was seen with regard to rural and urban voters, where it seemed to be marginally higher among rural voters than urban voters. And the beneficiary of this discontent across age, across class, across caste, across education levels was something which clearly benefited the Aam Aadmi Party. Let me take a fourth line of discontent that this election saw. Discontent against the state level leadership that was offered to the voters. In our surveys, we often have a question where we asked our respondents, who would you prefer as the chief minister of your state after this election? We offer no names, and whatever name is mentioned by the respondent is recorded. It's interesting that the current chief minister's name was taken by nearly 4 out of every 10 respondents. 37% of the respondents mentioned Mr. Man's name, and just a little over 2 out of every 10 mentioned Mr. Channi's name. And this again is quite a low record for a sitting chief minister. And a member of the Badal family was referred to by around 14% of the respondents. I don't remember in recent studies on Punjab that the support for a member of a Badal family as the prospective chief minister has fallen to such low levels. And let me add another point. If you look at this 37% who said Mr. Man to be their preferred chief minister choice, if you break up this, if you look at this 37%, who are the voters in that 37%? Interestingly, 29% of them are traditional Congress voters, and 31% of them are traditional Akali Dal voters. So Bhagwant Mann as chief minister was the favorite, of course, of the Aam Aadmi Party voters, but also of 3 out of every 10 traditional Congress voters and 3 out of every 10 traditional Akali voter voted for the chief ministerial candidate of the Aam Aadmi Party as their preferred chief minister choice. So friends, the larger point I would wish to make before this this audience, which understands Punjab and Punjab politics very well, is to, while crediting the Aam Aadmi Party for this victory, I would add that the victory was a direct expression of anger and dissent, of anger and discontent against the established parties which had been winning elections in the past. And the Aap because of its 8 years of work and presence in Punjab, seemed to be the perfect political platform to be able to benefit from this anger and to benefit from this discontent. The reason I'm raising this point is this discontent and anger against the traditional parties in the state has benefited the Aam. But now, what as you move forward would be the focus on the performance of this government. Because Aap has won this victory in the backdrop of discontent and anger against the conventional political forces. In Punjab, Aap is trying to make the position that we are an alternative to mainstream political parties. Will we see a situation like Delhi, where what was seen as an alternative to mainstream political parties became an alternative within mainstream political parties? Now, that is, I think, something a lot of people will be looking at in the months and years ahead. And I would be a little cautious in assuming that the Aap victory in Punjab opens the floodgates for the coming together of, or for the opposition space to be occupied by the Aap, because I think that would be too far a jump to make from the Punjab elections. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'd be very happy to respond to any queries and questions on my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandeep, for that excellent and lucid analysis, which we needed from you to correct some of our arguments and hypotheses. I think what we'll do now is open up the floor to questions from the attendees and the panelists. And I have two questions already for Surinder, which I've held over from the previous period. So Surinder, for you, the first question is from Professor Professor Singh from Riverside. He asks, he would like to know how you can equate Sikhi with Punjabi culture. And the second question, I suppose, is also directed at you, and is from Ashutosh, and he asks how we can, or can we essentialize the Sikh community in the kind of analysis that's presented. So those are the two opening questions. Perhaps you want to have a go, and then there are some coming in from others.
Yeah, I respond to first question of Professor Singh. See, the context that we were talking about is that of Punjab. That's why I was talking about how Sikhi appears to be emerging as a hegemonic regional culture. And this was not there. Sikhism was seen as separate, and it's in some senses related to the second question which Ashutosh is asking. So in the regional context of Punjab, I think there was an appeal of Panthic politics across Sikh communities, in the sense across caste groups, across sub-regions of Punjab. So there was something. That's how, in some sense, Akalis were able to garner a significant number of votes, even though it was never sufficient on its own. That's why we always wanted an alliance with Jan Sangh, or later on with BJP, to kind of make it a winning combination. But there was something called an appeal for Panthic politics. And, if you look at the persona of Punjab's chief minister, it would always be a Sabat Sabut Sikh, even if not Amritdhari, but somebody who has who is not a Patit Sikh. Not any longer, right? Two of the main candidates were Patit Sikhs. I mean, the current chief minister doesn't even keep here, and most of the time he was also without turban. It's only now that he has begun to tie turban regularly. We don't really know whether he would support it for long or not, though he is being appealed by the Panthik lobbies that he should now turn it into a proper Sikh. And this kind of, SGPC doesn't allow a Pathet Sikhs to vote. So he would actually not be eligible to vote for SGPC elections. I think this is a very interesting kind of important turning point. So one is not essentializing Sikh community, but I think there was a kind of Panthik appeal, which in some sense Akali Dal was able to generate. And that also created, as I'm saying, some kind of polarization in Punjab between the communal Hindu vote and the Panthik vote. Right? Panthik vote was a little more open because of the nature of Akali Party also being in a party of a regional kind of interest, which was the agrarian interest. And therefore, it always played multiple kind of cards. Sometimes it would become a regional party and will fight for the water and other regional issues. At another time, it would become a regional Sikh party when it is talking about Anandpur Sahib resolution. It's also reflected in a kind of different language, etc., etc. But it was again, as it is, I think Kumool's analysis shows very clearly that even though there is caste divide, but there seems to be an overlap in terms of electoral behavior across caste communities. There are OBC Sikhs which make for 31%, OBCs in Punjab which make for 31%, and my own guess is that majority of them, or at least in proportion to other population, they would also identify with Sikhism, many of them. So I think these are interesting specifics of Punjab, and we don't engage with them. We tend to work with very simple categories like scheduled caste, as Dalits, as one kind of caste cluster and one kind of collective mind. Same is the case with Hindu Sikh. I think we need to disaggregate them internally, but also see them historically evolving in the regional context, in the national context, and increasingly now in the global context. And I think that's what Mr. Pishora Singh was hinting, that we can no longer talk of Sikhs only locally confined to Punjab. But in context of Punjab, I think Punjabi language becomes very critical, because they are the ones who owned up to Punjabi language in the entire Punjab region across Pakistan and India. This is a very important point. Only the Sikh community said that this is our language. Even now, Pakistani Punjabis there is a lobby which wants to promote Punjabi language, but nobody proudly owns up to Punjabi language other than the Sikh Akalis and within Sikhism also. So I think there is an interesting revival of Punjabi language happening, and the kind of folk songs that Kumool was talking about again, they're very, very interesting, and their appeal is tremendous. And they're all in Punjabi, and they're spoken and they're sung by all kinds of people.
Thank you, Surinder, for that answer. And I move on to one for you, Sandeep, from Ashutosh. He wants to know a bit more about the support for AAP among the youth. He appears to suggest that this was overwhelming, and also that there was little variation in support for AAP across age groups.
Thanks, Ashutosh Bhai, for that question. I also have responded to it in the chat box. If you look across the age groups, which we have done as part of our survey, in the different age groups, the intensity of support for AAP does not vary significantly across age groups. It is the same level of support that is there across age groups. Therefore, I was making that point that among the younger generation, less than 25, less than 35, the AAP had more or less the same proportion of support as compared to the older generations. There may have been minor differences, but it was not something significant in terms of the younger generation having voted in much, much, much larger numbers for the AAP as compared to other generations. There is that article in our Hindu collection which shows across caste groups, across class groups, across education groups, among both men and women, and among age groups, you saw a sweep by the AAP. As I was mentioning a little earlier, one small area of difference was between the urban areas and rural areas, where the AAP support was marginally higher in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas.
Okay.
ask-
Surinder?
Yeah, just a small question to Professor Shastri. See, at some level, I completely agree with you that this was a kind of vote of discontent, but there seems to be also an element of positivity in this, in the sense that it was not entirely a negative vote. For example, the Sikh peasantry or agrarian rural Sikhs, they could have easily voted for the other Panthik party, Akali Dal. What is the other Panthik party? The more radical Akalis. They did not go in that direction. I think there is something that we need to also interpret differently and positively about why they were attracted to AAP. And as we all know, AAP has been in Punjab with some kind of positive agenda of delivery of certain kind of different politics, which does not really mislead people. So I was wondering if you would like to.
Surinder bhai, I would concede the argument you're making, and that's also the point I made, that the AAP victory or the AAP benefiting from the anger and discontent is also on account of the groundwork that the voters in Punjab have seen the party do for the last 8 years. But I would still hold on to the point I'm making when you refer to the Akali Dal. Our data very clearly shows that the vote of the Jat Sikhs is something that the Akali Dal was not able to retain. And some reasoning for that is the fact that the community saw the Akali Dal as being with the BJP in the initial days in getting the farm legislation passed. So on the farmers...
I was saying that they did not go to Simranjit Singh Man's Akali Dal.
Right.
So I think they had a choice. So that is the point I'm trying to make. So one should recognize these voters came to AAP even though they had a choice, and some of them did go to Simranjit Singh Man.
Surinderji, again, accepting your point, but I would go back to the point that when it came to who would be the one or which would be the platform which voters would choose to express that anger, discontent with the traditional parties which have been jockeying for power, when the choices which were there before them were seen by them, I think it's in that context that AAP became the preferred choice. So I'm not for a moment in any way undermining the fact that AAP had done groundwork for the last 7-8 years to be able to win this popular mandate. But what I'm also arguing is that that this mandate was a byproduct of the frustration, discontent, and anger with those who had been in power. And I'm saying it only for a particular reason, that as the AAP goes forward with its government, this is something that they would need to look at, because we have seen in the past governments which come to power riding this wave of discontent and unhappiness soon themselves are overtaken by that unhappiness and discontent if the delivery is not seen on the ground for what they have promised the voters in the election. So I was just making it from that particular context.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you, Sandeep. Firstly, one we haven't addressed is if you could say something about the pollsters and the outcome, who got it right and who got it wrong, because it seems to me that this one in this election, as opposed to the one in 2017, the pollsters were more in line with the actual result than previously, and this had a bearing on how people assessed AAP's chances. The second question relates to the point you've just made about parties which benefit from a discontent wave, and to what, how do you see any parallels with previous state elections in Punjab in the last 30 years or so? I'm thinking here of the state election in 1997, when the Akali Dal and the BJP swept to power after the militancy and against the Congress, and the way the Congress had engineered the 1992 elections. And the third point Sorry, I had a third point. I've completely forgotten it now. So I was sharing between the questions. I'm sure. Oh, the third point was the one that was a general point that the one that James made and you yourself have made about the unreplicatability of Punjab in other states nationally, and the implications for national politics. Perhaps we can come to that in the final session. But if you could address the first two, that'd be great.
Okay. On the first question, in a sense, not wanting to pat the back of Lokniti CSDS for its work. And I would prefer not to call ourselves cephalogists, but those who try to understand not who won the election and who is likely to win the election, but why somebody won an election. So that's the reason Lokniti does not do in principle seat forecast. We only do a vote forecast. And if you look at the vote forecast that we came up with on the day prior to the day of counting, we were very, very close to what was the final figure. As you said, Gurharpalji, most of the surveys which were published on the evening of the last round of elections did project the Aam Aadmi Party winning the election, though they were a little cautious because of how things went wrong in 2017. They were a little cautious. And while there were variations in parties with regard to how they projected or the nature of the victory, I think all of them projected in important ways that the AAP seemed to be ahead. I think one important difference that came in is, while most pollsters predicted that the Aam Aadmi Party would do very well in Malwa, in fact, people said Malwa would be like Delhi. The type of result that Aam Aadmi Party had in Delhi would be the type of result in Malwa. But I think those who were little conservative in their projections of an AAP victory did not anticipate the same, a reasonably good performance of the Aam Aadmi Party in the Doaba region and the Majha region. And that's where I think some of the opinion polls got the target wrong, because they were much more conservative in their assessment of the AAP performance in these other two regions. So while the results clearly showed that the Aam Aadmi Party did extremely well in Malwa, it actually did not do very badly in Doaba and the Majha region also. So that's where I think the difference came in. Now, Gurharpalji, on your second question, and like you forgot the third question, I forgot your second question as I sit down to listen to what you were saying.
My second question was on the wave and putting it in the context of the Punjab's record in state elections.
Oh,
and,
yeah, right. Okay, I got it. Right.
Yeah.
I think you're right that when we saw the Shiromani Akali Dal BJP victory earlier, that was on the the backdrop for that was very clearly the unhappiness with the previous government which was there. So Punjab has seen this in the past, and that's exactly the point I'm making, that when a party rides to victory on the basis of discontent with an incumbent government, the level of expectation from that government is extremely high of the voter. And down the road, if there is no visible reflection, or if there is no visible perception in the minds of the voter that something positive is being done in terms of the promise, that support can vanish very quickly. And we have seen that not just in the Punjab, we have seen this in other states across the country also. In my own home state of Karnataka, the Congress got a majority in 1989, which nobody got before that and nobody got after that. But when they changed three chief ministers in 5 years, you had in 1994 the Congress facing a debate. So that was the larger point I was making, that they have come on a wave of discontent. They have come with certain expectations, and what would be critical is how it responds to these expectations in the years it is going to be.
Thank you. And we will, of course, assess those expectations in the context of the financial difficulties that the state of Punjab faces. I will now ask Jim. He had his hand up for a question or a contribution. Jim.
Yes, thank you.
Mute yourself.
I have a quick question for Sandeep. Sandeep and I go back a very long way in South India, and it's very good to see him here. You mentioned the importance of anger and discontent, and I wonder if there's something broader across India that might be at work here, or maybe not. A few months ago, Yogendra Yadav wrote an article in which he said that one of the things that surprised him about recent opinion surveys across India, not just Punjab, was that people were feeling despondent. They were feeling pessimistic. They were feeling that things in the country were not going in the right way. Large numbers of people were feeling this way. And what surprised Yogendra was that in his experience over many decades as a survey specialist, people had always been surprisingly optimistic, given even in difficult times, but that seemed to have changed. There seemed to be a mood of despondency and frustration. Now, you have seen this make a difference in a Punjab election, but it may be that that mood isn't going to play much of a role outside Punjab, but maybe are we seeing something brewing quietly under the surface of India's politics here?
Jim, this is a great point of reflection. And if you look at our pieces on Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Goa, one point comes out very clearly, that if the BJP was able to return to power in these three states, in all these three states, all the three states, the level of satisfaction with the state government was much, much, much lower than the level of satisfaction with the central government. In fact, in Goa and Uttarakhand, the difference was huge between the satisfaction of the state government and the central government. It was a little lesser in Uttar Pradesh, but very, very massive in Goa and Uttarakhand. The broader point I'm making is that the BJP and the nature of its campaign in these three states was such that the central government and its leadership played an important role in garnering votes for it in these three states. Our data very clearly shows that in Uttarakhand and Goa, there was a very strong anti-incumbency against the state government. The fact that its chief minister lost in Uttarakhand indicates that the state government did not really appear to be very popular. But what took them across was the fact that the central government and its leadership was able to rescue them on the one hand. And in states like Uttarakhand, the Congress was able to ensure that they got themselves defeated. I would borrow a term that Jim used very often in Karnataka, that the Congress had this capacity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And they have done that in Uttarakhand. And in Goa, the BJP's anti-incumbency vote got split between parties, and which helped them to come back to power. So that discontent is there. But then in Uttarakhand, that discontent, the Congress was not able to capitalize. In Goa, that discontent got split. And in the process, you see the consolidation of vote that the BJP was able to achieve. And a final point, in Uttar Pradesh, I have never seen an election with the type of bipolarity that you see this time. 97% of the seats have been won by two parties. To the best of my knowledge, this has never happened in Uttar Pradesh, even in the very first election of 1952. 97% of the seats won by the top two parties. Who benefited from this? The BJP did, simply because the Samajwadi's vote share went up, but the Samajwadi was not able to try and create that class coalition, the caste coalition, which the BJP was able to create. The Samajwadi remained a Yadav Muslim party, whereas the BJP in a bipolar contest was able to bring together the non-Yadav OBC vote. So I think the discontent was visibly there. But then when the voter articulated her preference when pressing the button at the EVM, I think there are a range of other issues which come into play. And some of those are what I have explained in terms of the other states here very briefly. But I'm sorry I had to take the discussion a little away from Punjab. And if you have to blame anybody from that, Jim has to be blamed for taking it away.
No, thank you for that wonderful response. We're just over our scheduled time, and we have a number of other questions from attendees that I think are better addressed in the final session. So I take the opportunity now to thank our four distinguished speakers for this excellent beginning to our seminar, our webinar. And we now move on to our second session on a more detailed analysis of the party's performance. At this stage, I take a break and Arvind will chair this session. Over to you, Arvind, and to the introduction of the next speakers, next panel.
Thank you, Gurharpal. Yes, this is a good point if people want to take a very quick break, but I think we'll carry on with the session. Anybody who wants to take a break, please feel free. So this session is on the campaign and party performance by Congress, AAP, SAD, and the BJP. And we have four speakers. And just to remind the speakers, if they can get your talks done in about 12 minutes, that would be absolutely great. Our first speaker is Professor Ashutosh Kumar. Ashutosh Kumar is a professor in the Department of Political Science, Punjab University, Chandigarh, India. He earlier taught in the Department of Political Science at the University of Jammu, India. He's been associated with the Lokniti Network, CSDS, Delhi. His research centers around state politics with a focus on issues related to elections, identities, and development. He's published many, many books, which I won't go through here, and also published in a lot of international journals such as India Review, EPW, South Asia Research, Journal of Punjab Studies, etc. His forthcoming co-edited volume titled Electoral Politics in Indian States is slated for publication in November this year by Routledge. So Dr. Ashutosh Kumar, welcome, and the screen is now yours.
Thank you, Professor Arvind. First, let me, I have some thought to share with all of you. I have written something in the newspaper, but I have not really sat down to write a kind of academic article. So I'm thankful to all of you at Michigan to give me this opportunity to share my thought. And also, it was very kind to listen to all the experts on Punjab. I am a non-Punjabi who has been interested in knowing about Punjab and especially election studies. So I would share my thought about things. First, let us focus on this election, this 16th assembly election. First thing, like we are talking about landslide, but if you see the vote percentage, the Aam Aadmi Party got only 42.1%, whereas the Congress got 22.98% and Akali got almost like 18%. BJP also got 6.6%. So BJP is at par. You know, if you see the earlier performance of BJP has not done so badly. As far as the Congress party, it has lost out clearly. Akalis had 24% last time. They have got 18%. So it's not, I mean, if you see the first past the post system, that explains you the stupendous success of Aam Aadmi Party getting 92 seats. So in terms of seats, it's very remarkable, but in terms of vote percentage, it's not so remarkable. That's the first point I wanted to make, because everybody is talking about landslide. So it's not landslide in terms of the vote percentage. If you see the other thing, if you see the last 5 assembly elections, Congress on an average has got 36% of the vote, whereas Akali BJP alliance in the last 5 assembly elections have got 39.6% of the vote. So it has been 36, 39. So Punjab, this election would be remarkable, or we always talk about exceptionalism, right? So what was exceptional about this election? The first exceptional point which comes to my mind is the colossal defeat of Akali Dal. That is something which I would like to think about, that what has happened to such a great loss to Akali Dal, a very important party in Punjabi Suba, 100 years, and never got less than 30% or so. So what happened to Akali Dal? How can we explain the defeat of Akali Dal, reduced to 2 seats, and the Badal family, even the Badal senior losing out the assembly election in his pocket borough? This is first point. The second thing that we need to also raise question about the farmers issue. We have only 20 constituencies in Punjab which are overwhelmingly urban. Rest of the constituencies, that would come to 97 constituency, I suppose, would be overwhelmingly rural after this fourth delimitation exercise in 2009. So that tells you about the importance of the farming community, or those who are dependent on the farming sector. Now, people have been talking about the farmers' agitation against the 3 farm laws. But if you read the 3 farm laws, and I think Ronki Ram has done a work also on that, all these 3 farm laws are essentially related to the land owning peasantry. And who owns the land in Punjab? It's essentially the Jat Sikh community which owns the land. So it was basically, it shows you that how the social basis of political power in Punjab has not really changed. This tells you, if you say it like this, that this was a farmers issue, or the farmers movement, or the mobilization of the farmers, and the reference had been made to Malwa, how swept Malwa 66 out of 69 constituencies. It is not just like the victory of the farmers or the farming community. It's essentially the victory of the land holding farming community. And that brings me to Channi factor. Channi was an accidental chief minister. Channi was not the first choice of Congress. Everybody noted it, right? Channi became chief minister because Randhawa and Sidhu, they cancelled out each other, the both Jat leaders. Now, and I have no love lost for Sidhu, but let me say to Professor James Manor also that Sidhu was also used by the High Command to throw out Captain Amrinder Singh. He was in hibernation. He was brought out from hibernation, and he was used as a kind of a tool, instrument at the behest, acting at the behest of the Gandhi family to oust Captain Amrinder Singh. Again, it's very clear that Captain Amrinder Singh was not popular, and Congress was going to lose out under his leadership. That is another issue, that whether under Amrinder Singh, Congress would have got 18 seats or not. Because my guess is that it would have always got more than 18 seats under Amrinder Singh also. It was not like that there would have been a whitewash. Right. Now, this is another question which is there, that what happens to Akali Dal now? See, Akali Dal, I think 2007, Sukhbir Badal became the president of Akali Dal. Even now, after so many years, he has not established his leadership. And Badal Senior is aging, and probably it would be very difficult for Sukhbir Badal to hold on his leadership. What explains the decline of the Akali Dal? Very quickly, one, that you need in India today, I'm a student of state politics, you need to have many factors to succeed in the electoral politics. Among many issues, you have organization, leadership, resources, a narrative, and also you need a core social constituency. And what has happened under the leadership of Sukhbir Badal, that in order to become a catch-all party, Akali Dal has been losing its core social constituency of Jat Sikh peasantry. That is one major reason. Second thing, that Akali Dal always claimed that it is the sole custodian of the interest of the Sikh community. But over the period, in search of a wider vote, in search of maximizing its vote, Akali Dal has compromised again and again and again. This Dera factor, everybody knows it. So these are the blunder, and also supporting farm bills, and also taking a kind of a pro-centrist viewpoint. And everybody remembers Prakash Singh Badal going to Delhi, lobbying for 3 days for his daughter-in-law to get a ministerial position. So these are the fatal mistake which has been made by Akali Dal, and which doesn't augur well for the future of Akali Dal. Now, as far as the Congress is concerned, I would like to say that the Congress party repeated its history. In Nehruvian India, Congress party used to act as a ruling party as well as party of opposition. This time also, for quite some time, Congress party was in itself filling the gap of the opposition party. For a change, I thought that it was going to help Akali Dal, because Akali Dal was not on the political radar. And every time, media was full of internal wrangling within the Congress party. It was not only Sidhu who was a gladiator. There were so many people within the Congress party, Channi included, who were trying to topple, who were trying to discredit their own government. And when Channi became the chief minister, all the time Congress was projecting something like a masterstroke. They thought that it was a new government, whereas everybody knew that it was the same government. Only 2 or 3 new ministers were there. And what Channi did? Is Channi a kind of a Kansiram? No. Channi has been always a pro-establishment man. And Channi never tried to bring up the Dalit card. We say Dalit issue. That is good that now everybody has become aware that there are 55 constituencies where Dalits are more than 30%, and Dalits are 31.94 or something like 33% of the total population, as if it was not known earlier. But this time, at least Congress did something. Channi has lost out, but then Channi becoming chief minister was in itself a very important factor in Punjab. That a Dalit can become a chief minister, can become a chief ministerial face in Punjab, where the social structure of the power is completely lopsided. Nobody matters in Punjab except the Jet-Sikh gentry. Hindus matter only as a voter. And that's why you have this Khalistan card always playing out just before the election. This time also it was tried to play. So, and then, you have the Hindus. I think there are 39 constituencies where you have Hindus more than 50%. Right, more than 50% in 39 constituencies. And I'm talking about caste Hindus and all. What Channi was doing, when Channi became chief minister, he was projecting himself as a Garib Aadmi, Aam Aadmi. Everybody knew that he was not Aam Aadmi. He never for once, he tried to play the caste card. So somebody asked me that, is Punjab ready for a Dalit chief minister? I answered that, are Dalits ready for a Dalit chief minister? And CSDS survey tells you very clearly that Channi failed miserably to mobilize Dalits. Why did he fail? He failed because he was not he was very much a status quoist person. And what did he do? He could have taken one issue. The 3 issues were being raised by the rebels, including Channi. One was sacrilege issue, another was the drug issue, and the third was this rape mafia, transport mafia, and all kind of mafias. They are infesting Punjab. He did nothing. All he did was just making a tall announcement and moving out from here and there. Did nothing. He could have taken one issue and he could have shown results. And then the corruption charges against him, which was brought by the BJP against his nephew, that also probably was the last nail in his political future. So right now, I think what is going to happen, and another thing I would like to talk about this Punjab election is that it is very clear now that Punjab is no longer going to be a bipolar polity. In Punjab, it is going to be a kind of 4-party combination. I don't think that BJP would like to have an alliance with the Akali Dal in future, because Punjab is one state where BJP never got any traction by making an alliance with the regional party. You refer to Karnataka, BJP gained from Janata Dal secular. BJP gained from Odisha, Biju Janata Dal. But or Trinamool Congress, BJP has always gained by making an alliance with a regional party, local party. But here it was confined to 23 constituencies. It never got them more than 6% or 7% of the vote. So my guess is that BJP is now going to be on its own, and BJP would look for the Hindu social constituency for its support, whether it's a good news or a bad news for Punjab with a troubled past. That is something which only the time would tell. Another thing I wanted to just quickly say about this landslide of Aam Aadmi Party. I completely agree with some panelists that it is not only a negative vote. Obviously, Punjabis had this khundak, which is a typical Punjabi word, to take kind of to show because Punjabis held these two parties which had held power in the last 25 years, responsible for this deceleration in the Punjab economy. And also, I mean, I move around in Punjab, and I was one who was not involved in the survey, but I predicted much earlier, Pramod ji would agree with me, that there would be a landslide in favor of Aam Aadmi Party. Everywhere you would go, I would go to the colleges and all, and as an outsider, I would ask them, and they would only say, Jhadu chalega, you know. So it was like that the candidate constituencies, I mean, I agree that some 18 seats where the Congress has won, it also because of the candidates. But as far as the Aam Aadmi Party victory is concerned, it is mainly because of the desire for change. And I would also say that there has been, and this is very surprising, that in a Punjabi Suba, I thought that there was a tacit acceptance of the leadership of Kejriwal. Nobody is under any illusion. Everybody knows that Kejriwal would be the man behind the power. He would be the man who would be calling the shots in Punjab. This is something you just see his persona, his leadership style so far, 2012. So it's almost like 9 years of his existence of Aam Aadmi Party. Everybody can see, and Kejriwal would like to make a change. That is something which I want. I think that I'm optimistic for the future of Punjab, that maybe he would like to bring some change, turn around in Punjab, so that he can showcase Punjab in front of other states. And if the Aam Aadmi Party, because somebody also said that I think Sandeep Bhai said, that if you have such a massive mandate, and this mandate is not because of some programmatic effort. Let me tell you very clearly that Aam Aadmi Party this time even did not take up drug issue in a big way, unlike 2014 or 2017. They were playing the same game as the Congress and Akali Dal. They were promising 1,000 rupees. They were promising this. They were promising that. Even today, Man has announced 25,000 new jobs to be created in Punjab. So it was all competitive populism. Aam Aadmi Party played the same game. You know, Aam Aadmi Party so far, I mean, it has been 2-3 days they have been in power. They have not made even one single statement to take on the drugs, right? So this is something which is really very disappointing also to some extent, that whether Aam Aadmi Party and the kind of promises they have made, whether they would be able to fulfill them. So the need of the Punjab is two needs I consider as an outsider, as a watcher of Punjab. One, that social basis of political power needs to be opened up. And when I say this is not only Dalits, it's also Hindus, caste Hindus. It's also the Khatri Sikhs. You know, this is something which is also hampering the economic development of Punjab. Because why this farmers' agitation and the farming distress? Because no government has the courage to take the radical measures to do something which can really bring a turnaround in the farming sector. This is one. So whether the social basis of political power would be changed, I don't think so. Aam Aadmi Party coming to power is not going to make any difference in the social basis of political power in Punjab. It would be business as usual. Number two, would there be a real change in combating the Mafia Raj in Punjab? I think there would be some change, there would be some effort on the part of the government to take on. I don't know about drugs, because that is something, it brings a big money. You remember, like in Godfather, Don Corleone doesn't want to do with drugs, but his elder son is very much tempted. So it brings big money, and there are lots of people involved. But I think that there would be some action against the sand mafia and transport mafia and all. Probably there would be some also effort to lessen corruption at the higher spaces, because Aam Aadmi Party has got 92 seats. So if somebody is not really falling in line, they can be weeded out by Kejriwal. So that would be something that can be a good news for Punjab, that probably there would be some kind of positive effort to clean up the corrupted and institutionalized corrupted system in Punjab. And I think I have great faith in the Punjabis, because Punjabis have done so well. They have in it, if they get a right kind of leadership and right kind of direction, probably they can bounce back. Otherwise, there is a kind of a hopelessness. I mean, what you can say about Punjab, where the youth doesn't want to remain in Punjab. Everybody you ask in the Punjab University, they have the aim to go abroad. So they don't want to remain in Punjab. The parents, electrician, the general thing, mere bachche ko kharab kar diya, mera bachcha kharab, they use this word for their own son, kharab ho gaya, So this is something, I remember I going to Khalsa College, Amritsar, and if Shekhon Sahab is there or not, somebody said, Khalsa College, that inhone apne bachchon ko kharab kar diya. Synthetic drug would cost money. So who can purchase those synthetic drugs? It would be the jet sick children. So they have destroyed the entire generation for their, this thing. And so that's why people have taken their revenge, and it's a kind of a democratic response. And we should welcome this kind of verdict which has happened. Whether it would really bring a badlao, that is something which only time would tell. But right now, people have done their job, and let us see what happens in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I think in the interests of time, I'm going to go straight to the next speaker. If you have questions...
Yeah, excuse me. If I have to leave around 9:40, if you can give me 10 minutes now, it's fine. Otherwise, it's all right.
I'd be happy to do that. I think that's if you're under constraints, that's fine. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Professor Pramod Kumar, who's director of the Institute of Development and Communication, Chandigarh. Professor Kumar received his PhD from Punjab University on violence in Indian politics. He became director of the Institute of Development and Communication in 1992, has chaired commissions on governance of reforms in the state of Punjab and Haryana. His recent publication includes a book on the idea of New India, essays on critical thought, and he's a recipient of the prestigious Homi Bhabha Award for the year 1988 to 1990, and is the author of many books and scholarly articles. Professor Pramod Kumar, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. For accommodating me and giving me time, to make my presentation. At the outset, I have listened to Ashutosh and earlier speakers. I have only a kind of a tangential view, whatever, many things which have been mentioned. To me, the first thing which has come out of this election is that it is the Aam Aadmi Party has replaced Congress and trying to compete with BJP. This is the first message, which one gets. So my, take on this is that at the provincial level, the AAP has shifted, from national to the provincial levels. It will enter in all those states where there is a bipolar politics exists. For example, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Rajasthan, Gujarat, all are bipolar states. And the AAP has a strategy now, seems to be to go local and then to the national. So the main focus is to occupy the space vacated by the Congress party and compete with the BJP, and in the long run, align with the regional parties to emerge as a national alternative. I see this design emerging very slowly. So my second, take on this is that the Akali Dal, which has been mentioned by earlier speakers, is the only party which perhaps may have a future in Punjab. And I think that Punjab will return back to the bipolar politics in the next 5 years, because the AAP will emerge as a new Congress, and Akalis, will be the regional party. And the alliance between Akali Dal and BJP, I foresee coming in next few months. In any case, because BJP has seen that they have reduced to
You're cutting out. Okay, if we don't hear back in another minute, I'm going to have to assume that we're not going to get this connection back for a while. So, Pramod, are you there? Okay, I think his connection has cut out. So let me move to our originally second slated speaker for this session, Ronki. And when Pramod comes back, we'll just have to wait for that session. So Alex, if you can keep Pramod muted now. I'm going to introduce Ronki Ram. Ronki Ram is currently Shahid Bhagat Singh Professor.
Hello.
He's come back. Okay.
Come back. And but I'll quickly finish. I'll take only 5 minutes.
Okay.
Now. Basically, the second point I thought I'll make is that change was the buzzword in Punjab, and it's very interesting. The word was used, but for whom and for what, that has been kept ambiguous. And this catchphrase was to
Pramod, you're cutting out. We can't hear you.
I know.
Carry on. Okay, you're back.
I'm coming back and going.
You're there now again. Just get. You've gone again. So, Alex, I'm going to have to. Can you just mute that one for the time being? It's a bit disruptive, unless he comes back right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Pramod, we'll give you this one chance to just see if you can make your final points.
So my final point is that the main focus, for example, of the Akali Dal was being a Panthik party, having a provincial stance, and having a sport base of the peasantry. All these three main thrust of the Akali Dal became converted into the historical baggage at different phases. And today they are become historical baggage. For example, its provincial stance with the coalition, with the alliance with the BJP, compromise with the federal principles, has made this principle compromise. Second, Panthik standpoint was, polluted with the unresolved sacrilege cases. And the third was its peasantry base, which was diluted because they were accused of being promoters of 3 agriculture acts. And the governance issue, which they drawn a major advantage in 2007 to 2012, and then they again won the election, was reduced to allegation of being involved in corruption, drug mafia, and other things. And similarly, about the National Congress, I find very interesting thing that their whole basis, the basic, principle and position was secular nationalism, liberalization of the economy, and regionalization of the national issues. So it became discriminatory against Hindus, dehegemonized Jat Sikhs, and decoupling of Dalits from others. And this decoupling with the Channi announcement, it decoupled Dalits from the others. And that has harmed them in a big way. And dehegemonization of Jats and the Hindus happened simultaneously. Because why I'm mentioning a Punjabi society is entirely different, where these fault lines are the caste and the religious factors do not function as is function in other parts of the country. And then the labeling of traditional parties versus the new party, that was the buzz, and that was the main thrust of the Aam Aadmi Party, and which in that they accused all the traditional parties they are hand in glove. And the kind of campaign which they launched was basically saying that all the traditional parties are the parties of the looters. For example, I mean, if I may mention, the Congress party initially mentioned Mr. Sidhu that Amrinder and Mr. Badal are in cahoots, and they were the looters of Punjab. And they said that Channi is an unstable factor, he's a misguided missile. And then BJP said that Sidhu is a misguided missile, and Channi is sand mafia chief. And then Channi said, no, Majitha is the drug chief. So all the parties accused themselves and they campaigned against themselves, and to the advantage of Aam Aadmi Party. They were standing there smiling that all these parties are demolishing themselves by accusing each other of being thugs. And that is the major advantage of the Aam Aadmi Party. And the second, related part was another grammar where the Aam Aadmi Party introduced a new concept that I termed it as manifestos rather than manifesto. So they issued a menu card. The menu card for the farmers, the traders, the students, the Dalits, the women, industrialists, replacing the manifestos. So that was another thing, which Aam Aadmi Party innovation. So that innovation itself transformed the whole, scene in Punjab, where menu card were issued and and they enjoyed all the trust of the people. They thought that Abki Bar Kejriwal first chance we should give them because others have not fulfilled any promises. So this menu card approach also helped. And the third, the catch-all approach versus fault lines. So Aam Aadmi Party presented itself as a catch-all party, and all other were reduced to, for example, Congress became introduced Channi factor, and then the Dera factor was introduced by the BJP, and then Akali Dal also realized on its Jat, reclaiming its Jat support base. So all were reduced to the addressing to the different fault lines, but the Aam Aadmi Party emerged as a catch-all party. And therefore, in the end, I'll say only the last point which I like to conclude with this, that I see basically that Aam Aadmi Party will emerge as a major party in North, and next target will be Himachal. There also they will accuse the traditional parties of Congress and BJP club together, and will present as the new avatar of the Congress party there. And I see the Congress party can be replaced even in Himachal, and then maybe next Haryana, and then even in some part of Gujarat. So basically they are addressing to shape the perception of reaching out the footloose voters looking to move away from the status quoist traditional parties. And the footloose voters, the number in Punjab ranges from 15 to 20%. And then there is a ideologically unbound pragmatic floating votes seeking doles. They addressed. And the third is the new young voters in communication with anarchist social media were targeted to unnerve the traditional parties and leaders struggling to overcome massive trust deficit. So they maximize on the narrative built by traditional parties that they are the looters, mafias, and anti-Punjab. And then second point, which they presented themselves as a paternalistic caretaker party, where they mentioned about, giving 1,000 rupees, to the women, every month, then free electricity, free, education, all those kind of things. So a paternalistic party position and distance itself from secular nationalism, national security, agrarian crisis. So, and having no historical baggage, rather having historical advantage. And this has transformed this will transform the Indian politics in a big way. Let's not only confine to Punjab. I think this lesson from Punjab are much bigger. And I see, that this as a challenge, to the Congress party, and in competition with the BJP, you will see that a new, emergence of a party from the North India in bipolar state, they will be able to make their stake very well. That is the thing which one has to watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that. So on to our third speaker. Let's just save the questions towards the end so that the speakers can have their full say. Our third speaker is Professor Ronki, who is currently Shahid Bhagat Singh Chair, Professor of Political Science at Punjab University, Chandigarh, and a visiting professor at the University of Wolverhampton, UK, and a member of the State Higher Education Council, UT Chandigarh. He's published extensively on social mobility, identity politics in books and peer-reviewed international journals like Modern Asian Studies, Journal of Asian Studies, Asian Survey, Contributions to Indian Sociology, South Indian survey, amongst many others. Professor Ronki, the screen is yours. You muted still.
Thank you, Arvind.
Yep.
I will stick to time, 12 minutes. I would like to share with you a few points which I differ with some of the earlier panelists. I would start with two questions which I come down at the end of my talk. The first question is whether in Punjab there really emerged any alternative or not. Whether this election was an election towards alternative. Second, we find that the underlying narrative could not have been identified by any of the political parties. And secondly, the underlying narrative was also not come to the surface till the elections results were out. Here I try to point out that the issues and the underlying narrative was something very specific, and the empirical studies, they were based on obsolete indicators. They did not, till date, able to capture what was there in Punjab. So we have to now think again, what indicators we are going to do. Empirical methods are fine, no doubt, but the indicators through which we try to test the temperatures of the electorate's minds, we fail to do this. Now, all these things I'm trying to talk about right now. But the third issue is about that all the MLAs and now the cabinet members, the ministers in Punjab, the Aam Aadmi Party, they are new faces. How would they are going to do experiment with the things which were bad? Are they going to rectify those, or would they like to rectify the grounds from where these things emanated is yet to be seen. With this, I will come down to some of the issues that why this election, as Sandeep Shastri said very rightly, it was a discontent. And it was there the people. I will go further to this. First of all, this election was fought without mentioning for any time what were the real issues which was there in the mind of the people, or it was in the open. And there was no manifesto issued by all the parties. Election was issueless and elections were fought without manifestos. So this is something very, very interesting. Those who are trying to provide alternative, there was no manifesto. Those whose politics is going to be rejected, there were no manifestos. So people were not bothered about it. This is something very, very important that we must try to understand. The second was that many says that Congress got defeated because of infighting. Others said the other issue was that Shiromani Akali Dal was inherently very, cohesive. There was a compact internal house. The Congress fort was simmering with a lot of contradictions, whereas the Shiromani Akali Dal fort was full of confidence. So these two issues were there, but the question was that both the forts were dismantled. In the one case, we easily come to the conclusion that it was due to the internal fighting, that Sidhu destroyed it, and Captain Amarindras were not doing good. So Taniva could not perform well. All these things were there, but what happened for the defeat of the Akali Dal? We did not know. We could not find why it is so. That was not a fractured house. That was not a connected house. It was a well-integrated house. And the other point was that we find that ultimately what was there within the electoral space in Punjab mostly talked about over the last many years was that ultimately 32% votes, the marginalized people, the scheduled caste votes, that's going to play before election. Every party tried to placate that. Every party across the board, across the ideological lines. And that was also a trap which Congress got into. They said that people do it, and they try to loudly say at their full voice that here you were promising and we made it. But the question was that, even that, I try to reflect on this in many of my articles, that whether scheduled caste vote would be consolidated or not, we are not sure. But definitely it may have repercussions in other votes, other sections of the society. But exactly what happened in Punjab this time, opposite to the Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand, caste factor did not play any role. So now, could we make this as a factor that caste has ceased to play any role? Or could we say that more people are concerned with change in the system than with all these freebies? But the question of freebies is not again, raised by one party. All the parties, even the Aam Aadmi Party, try to overdo that by saying that 1,000 rupees above the 18 years of age among the girls, women, should be given. But no, the question was that, what was that which has led such a massive victory in terms of seats, if not in votes? What was that? Definitely, it was there as a discontent. But the question was that, what sort of discontent was there? Whether this discontent has any expectation at that time, or this discontent would remain there. Whether the discontent has ceased to exist after the election results are over, or discontent still persists in Punjab. Because whether this discontent has to do something with the program of the Aam Aadmi Party or not, this question has not been addressed. We didn't find that how we would try to locate that issue before us. We are also not sure whether it was the overconfidence within the Congress, different members of the Congress party, that they are better placed than the Akali Dal in terms of anti-incumbency factor. Although 5 years have already passed since Shiromani Akali Dal and Bharatiya Janata Party had ruled Punjab for consecutively 2 terms. But still, there was a feeling among the Congress groups within the party and the government that their incumbency, anti-incumbency is much more than us. So they try to do something. Here, I will try to underline again and again. What is happening at the center? Those 21, 22 group, they're trying to replace Sonia, Rahul, Priyanka, which Jim was trying to say, trambulate. They're trying to say, get rid of them so the Congress would survive. In Punjab, it was already there that something's going to happen. Now the time that we will never get any opportunity to come. So all these Jangar brigade, they were ready to become CM. So it was not something which was really going to do with the non-performance of Captain Amarinder Singh. It was more of their craze to take the seat and to unseat him. That happened in Punjab. So that also brought something to do with which we never find in the studies. So ultimately, we find that discontent was there, no doubt, but that discontent is going to stay long. The question would be, what would be the major stance of the current government, the party in which form the government to do that? Here would come whether ultimately the whole electoral scene in Punjab, whether there was some change or not, that has yet to come. So we should not be very much happy that this is the result, because then we would be only doing what we were doing before the exit poll and what we were doing after the exit poll. The question was that we need to further streamline, if not our methodology, our indicators. We try to find more clearly what people probably we need some more ethnographic work in Punjab to understand this. Here, point wise this, something definitely has made psychologists as well as the other political analysts, to worry that all these factors which we find it, people did not, bother about what they were gaining. They took advantages from both Akali Dal and BJP after then Congress. They happily taking rations on blue card and yellow cards. They were happy to get all the freebies, but at the same time, those freebies did not get votes. Why? At the same time, they say that the Aam Aadmi Party would going to give us freebies, just be accepted. But they won't want freebies. They want to be empowered so that they can buy their own food. They can buy their food themselves. They want empowered to that extent. So this issue is probably very much interesting. That's why it was not only discontent, somewhere they have realized, if not alternative, they have some inkling that this is my last point, that the Aam Aadmi Party did perform to some extent in Delhi. So that performance would also be repeated in Punjab. So there was not only, a default vote, which mostly some of the analysts were saying, there was also hope. So that hope is probably making some ground for alternative. That alternative is in the making, not alternative is there, or it was there, it is in the making. Let's see how the present regime will try to strengthen that alternative, and how the psychologists and the analysts will try to understand the nerves, the pulse of people. That's a very, very interesting question. So I congratulate Gurharpal and Arvind for this webinar, and more discussion would come in the time to come. Thank you very much, Arvind. I hope within 12 minutes I was able to complete.
Thank you so much, Ronki, for a very succinct analysis, keeping well within the sort of 12-minute time span. We have about 20 minutes to go. Just a quick reminder, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A. That goes to panelists as well. So we probably will have a few minutes to have questions here before we go into the third session. So the fourth speaker on this session is Professor Satnam Singh Deol. Dr. Satnam Singh Deol is an associate professor and the head of political science department at Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. His most recent book is Human Rights in India, Theory and Practice. Dr. Satnam Deol, very warm welcome to you, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Mandair. And a very special thanks to Professor Gurharpal Singh ji that he has provided me the opportunity to share my views, my ideas with regard to the recently happened assembly elections in Punjab. And a very special thanks to Alex Prosy, because he has been very active in arranging all things. So without wasting much time, because I'm sure most of the attendees have already started looking at the watches or clocks. And my situation, I do not find myself in a better position here, because all the panelists, they have already discussed very much with regard to various aspects of the recently polled elections. When the stronger and the mighty polls, they have already expressed their vigor and energy. Myself being a poor calf, I'm not finding myself in a much better position, even though I shall try to discuss with you the fate of Shiromani Akali Dal during the recently held elections. Shiromani Akali Dal, the primary Akali Dal, Shiromani Akali Dal Badal, it scored approximate 18% votes, and it was able to win over only 2 seats, 2 constituencies. The most worst performance of Shiromani Akali Dal since 1966. My question is, or I shall try to even answer these questions. The question is, the defeat, this kind of feeble performance of Shiromani Akali Dal, is it patterned? Is it spontaneous? Is it only a catalyst? People, they expressed their discontentment towards Shiromani Akali Dal. But because when we say discontentment is most of the times temporary. If people, they expressed their discontentment towards Shiromani Akali Dal, is it temporary? Second question is it patterned or is it part of a historical progress? What do I mean to say? Sometimes a political party is able to perform good and able to establish regime. The other times the party faces defeat. Is this defeat a periodic defeat? Or is this defeat or is this feeble performance of Shiromani Akali Dal a conclusive performance? I shall try to answer this question. When we try to analyze the relationship the performance of Shiromani Akali Dal, the electoral performance of Shiromani Akali Dal in Punjab, first of all, we have to settle the relationship of Shiromani Akali Dal with Punjab. What I mean to say? I mean to say is that what is the primary vote bank of Shiromani Akali Dal? And what kind of politics has been providing benefits to Shiromani Akali Dal? Shiromani Akali Dal, since its commencement, and especially since 1966, has been concentrating on the issues with regard to Sikh identity, then the regional demands and regional aspirations of Punjab. Thirdly, it has always tried to highlight itself as the vanguard of the interests of peasantry. Now, the question arises, when the party has gained only approximate 18% votes, what are the reasons? What are the reasons? The primary reason is that the party totally neglected all of its 3 strengths, the historical strengths. Why do I say so? Why do I say so? Whenever Shiromani Akali Dal has established regime in Punjab, or whenever Shiromani Akali Dal has done positive in electoral politics, it has happened due to the agitation of Shiromani Akali Dal for protecting the ethnic interests of Sikhs or the regional demands of Punjab. When in 1977, they had established the regime, people belonging to Punjab, they had given a verdict to Shiromani Akali Dal. Why? Due to its opposition of emergency and due to its stance in favor of the Anandpur Sahib resolution. When in 1985, it got victory in the assembly elections, what was the reason? People, especially Sikh community living in Punjab, it had totally got disentangled from the central government being led at that time by the Congress party. That was the reason when Shiromani Akali Dal, it expressed its pro-Sikh sentiments, Sikhs, they favored Shiromani Akali Dal. In 1997, Shiromani Akali Dal again performed very positive. What were the reasons? The primary reason was that Shiromani Akali Dal, under the leadership of Prakash Singh Badal, it made commitments with Sikh community that whatsoever negative, whatsoever vicious, whatsoever criminal and cruel has happened against the innocent Sikh youth, justice shall be done. But when they formed the government, what happened? Prakash Singh Badal said, past should be buried. And what happened later? What happened later? People, they gave another chance to Shiromani Akali Dal Badal, but the dissatisfaction, the dissent of people eventually converted into disenchantment during 2017, I should say. Why? Party totally neglected the support to the ethnic issues of Sikhs. Party totally neglected the regional issues of Punjab. Party totally neglected the interests of peasantry. The party that had been projecting itself as the vanguard of the interests of Sikhs. Sikh people, they had to launch an agitation against the same party. Why? What were the allegations? The allegations were that nothing positive had been done in the cases of the sacrilege, of the disrespect of the sacred holy book of Sikh, Shri Guru Granth Sahib. Now, my question is, first of all, that disenchantment was expressed largely by the Sikh community towards Shiromani Akali Dal Badal in 2017. Shiromani Akali Dal Badal could not observe that. The leadership, including Prakash Singh Badal and Sukhbir Singh Badal, they perceived that defeat only as a pattern, defeat as a temporary defeat. But my observation is that the Shiromani Akali Dal traditionally has the primary and large vote bank of Sikh community. When it neglected the interests of the Sikh community, now the Sikh community has not expressed any dissent or only discontentment. The Sikh community has actually expressed its total disenchantment towards Shiromani Akali Dal. Now the question is, are Panthik agendas not relevant for Sikh community now? Have Sikhs started thinking that the issues with regard to ethnic identity are irrelevant now? No, no. Actually, my observation is that actually that is the Shiromani Akali Dal Badal that has neglected Sikh interest. Due to that, Sikhs, they have neglected Shiromani Akali Dal Badal. And when I say Sikhs, they neglected and Sikhs, they expressed their disenchantment towards Shiromani Akali Dal, I do not mean to say that Sikh now no more need Shiromani Akali Dal. Sikh community, we have to observe the demography of India, and we have to observe the demography of Punjab as well. Sikh comprise of only 2% of India's population. And in Punjab even, their population is not more than 50 to 53%. In this scenario, a micro minority and the most visible minority of the world, it does need its own political party. But the party that had committed to protect the interests of Sikhs, that has badly failed in protecting those interests. That is my observation. Why has the party done that? Why has the party done that? Shiromani Akali Dal very rightly had observed that Sikh electorally or politically always had been divided and always have been divided. That was the reason they realized the necessity of getting votes of Hindu community as well. Due to this compulsion, what did they do? They came with an alliance with the BJP. Now, I shall try to discuss the relationship between Akali Dal and BJP with the analogy of a fish called as Arapaima fish that has been found in the Amazon water basins. That fish is able to get its food from the water itself while eating the fish, but though that food does not satisfy the appetite of that fish, especially for the purpose of reproduction, it needs more food, and to get that food, it has to come to the surface of the earth. Shiromani Akali Dal, it is actually the fish of the waters of Sikh identity. But due to that compulsion of forming the government and getting closer to that winning combination, it has to slightly come out of those waters, but it forgot to come back to those waters. It started supporting BJP blindly. Now, what is the harm in supporting the BJP? Let me share with you another observation. Since the period of post-militancy, no government, no party has established government in Punjab, the party that has alliance or any manifestation at the level of center. What I mean to say is, whenever there is rule of the Congress party or the UPA alliance at the center, Congress party will not win in Punjab. Whenever there has been a rule of the NDA led by the BJP, there will not be establishment of the government of Shiromani Akali Dal. What I mean to say is, the agenda, the aspirations of national level parties are totally contrary to the regional aspirations of especially minorities. BJP, pursuing the agenda of homogeneous nationalism, it can never protect the issues with regard to ethnic identity of Sikh people. And Prakash Singh Badal used to say, now in future as well, he would say that Shiromani Akali Dal and BJP has no master rishta. The Shiromani Akali Dal and BJP has nail and flesh ties. What I mean to say is that the interests are opposite. The interests are contrary. In search of getting votes, in greed of getting votes of Hindu community, you have lost your primary vote bank. That is the vote bank of Sikh peasantry. Now, my another observation is that if Shiromani Akali Dal Badal has lost, there are a number of other Akali Dals as well. Akali Dal Sanyukt, Akali Dal Amritsar led by Simranjit Singh Mann, and the United Akali Dal. Would they emerge as larger stakeholders, as the vanguards of the interest of Sikhs? No. No, my observation is no, never. Why? Akali Dal Sanyukt is formed by people, those who have already been branded as opportunist by Punjabi people. Simranjit Singh Mann and his leadership has already been tried by the Sikhs. Even Baba Joginder Singh, father of Sant Jarnail Singh Pindrawale, had to give a statement that Simranjit Singh Mann has distracted from the path of Sikh identity and Sikh issues during late 1980s. Now, my another observation is that the alliance of Shiromani Akali Dal Badal with BJP in future, would that be beneficial for Akali Dal Badal? No. No. Until until the BJP is replaced by any other alliance or any other party at the center, Sikh people, Punjabi people in general, Sikh people particularly, they are not going to accept Shiromani Akali Dal Badal supporting the BJP, especially after the, what should I say, the stance, very rigid stance the BJP took to defend the three controversial agrarian laws. Now, what is the prognosis? What would be the future of Shiromani Akali Dal? My last conclusion is that Sikh community living in Punjab, they need their own party. They need their own party. And Shiromani Akali Dal had been perceived and have been perceived by the Sikh as a banyan tree under which Sikh people, they find a shelter, they find a shadow. But now Sikh people, they have started perceiving that Badal family that had declared earlier itself as a nourisher, now it has been proving as a parasitic for that banyan tree called as Akali Dal. Akali Dal would survive, but what do I mean to say is Sikh people, they need Shiromani Akali Dal as equal as they want to escape the same Akali Dal from Badals. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are actually just in time. We have about 3 minutes before we switch to the next session. If there's anybody who's got a very quick comment, especially from the panelists, I'm happy to take it now. Otherwise, we can use the last session today for a question answer session between the panelists and with the audience as well. So if anybody in 2 minutes can make a response to any of the other panelists, I'm happy to take that. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break of a couple of minutes. If there are any takers, happy to do that. Otherwise, we should move to the final session. All right, I think the consensus is that we'll have the main discussion in the third session. Okay, so let's take a break of just 5 minutes maximum. People will want to kind of refresh themselves and come back. We will start in exactly 5 minutes, and I would request all of the speakers to be in the main room, please. So thank you very much to all of our speakers in the second session. And I look forward to seeing you all. And Gurharpal will be the chair of the last session. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm just going to pass the baton over to Professor Gurharpal Singh to chair the third session, and we have a good 45 minutes for discussions. So, Harpal, it's over to you again.
Okay, thank you, Arvind. We move on to our final session. And in this session, I want to turn our attention to the broader implications of the election result. What does a result mean in the short and medium term for Punjab politics? Is this the end of community and caste politics? And how will the app deliver on its tall promises, given the huge financial crisis that the state faces? And what are the likely sources of tension between the AAP in Punjab and the leadership in Delhi? Indeed, how will the center-state relations now fare, given that the BJP is in Delhi and the experience that we have of the BJP and the AAP and Delhi administration? And some of the other questions which were raised in the first session, namely, does this verdict represent a new turn in Punjab politics? Are we seeing something akin to an indigenous form of populism in Punjab, represented by Bhagwant Mann and his easy form of communication through social media with the young and the old and with the dispossessed? Is he a comedian in politics, the new Zelensky of Indian politics, or will he be overshadowed by his masters in Delhi? So these are some of the questions, and of course there are many other issues that have risen, and in the very interesting points that have been made by panelists and in their presentations, not least by Satnam in his last point, that Punjab needs a regional party, a party that represents the interest of the majority Sikh community in the state. So I open the floor, and I think, those who want to contribute, or I may ask participants to contribute, and those who have questions, please, both to a panelist and to the attendees, do send in your questions and concerns. So I may take the liberty of asking Surinder to respond to some of the points that I've made, or some of the questions that I've raised, and whether he sees any of these unfolding or how he sees them being raised or discussed or unfolding in the short term.
I think I more or less agree with you, the kind of things that you are implying, even though you are not putting them directly. At some level, for political scientists, this is just another election. And this is just another government who obviously would not deliver on all its promises, because we know they will not deliver. They neither have the capacity in terms of their professional skills, or in terms of larger context in which they are located. Punjab having so much of debt, and the point that I think Ashutosh and Ronki and others have also made, that their populism and obsession with freebies, rather than kind of thinking about how to shift Punjab politics. And I think that's a very important point already made. But I think at another level, one could also raise the same question slightly differently, or put it slightly differently, is then what does explain? How do we interpret it? And for that, I think we need another 25 years, but we can't afford that. I think these are long-term kind of processes. Nothing might change within 2 years. It might internally implode. That possibility exists enough. I mean, all said and done, Punjabis are Punjabis. I mean, it's not easy for anyone, whether it is Kejriwal or Modi or anyone else, to control Punjabis from Delhi. And there is a general perception of Delhi Sarkar, the point that Satnam was also trying to make, which is not gone away. I think it's very, very strong in Punjabi mind, and it would remain. I think the point that Sandeep Shastri was making was very interesting in terms of lack of acceptance of central government in Punjab, unlike say in Uttarakhand and Goa, where the local government was in some sense seen negatively, but the central government was seen positively. Not in case of Punjab. So in Punjab, Modi is not accepted, and dare I say, even Kejriwal is not accepted. This vote is not for Kejriwal. Kejriwal cannot be Modi like Modi has been in UP, right? In Punjab, the vote was for Aap as political party. There was some attraction for Delhi model and the fact that they have delivered there and they would deliver here, they can deliver here, they might deliver here. But the vote was for Bhagwant Mann. The day Aap declared Bhagwant Mann as chief ministerial candidate, their vote share went up by 5 to 6%. I'm not saying it. The trackers are saying this. So I think that made a lot of difference. So it was also a regional vote. It was not vote for Arvind Kejriwal. I think there is obviously a Delhi model and stuff like that. But more importantly, can Punjab afford to not innovate? Right? We are talking about Punjab, which came into existence in 1966. And this was also the moment when Green Revolution was in some sense taking off in Punjab. And this was followed by a new kind of regional politics, which was led by the agrarian elite. That agriculture is in some sense not there any longer, even though there is regional elite. But regional elite is no longer living in the village. Regional elite is significantly diversified. Agrarianism only becomes a kind of political populist channel for them to attract votes. And I think, again, the point that Satnam was saying, that agrarian vote, agrarian sector vote, that was also, that overlapped with the Panthic vote, that reality does not exist any longer. Right? Even though holding size, average holding size is much bigger in Punjab, but even in Punjab, nearly, I think, half the holdings are less than 5 acres. And given that Punjabi aspiration is much higher, they can't survive with 1 acre, half acre of land like the Biharis could, by simultaneously migrating out and working somewhere else and doing that circular migration thing. So I think regional ethos of Punjab are very different. That's why everyone wants to go abroad. So the future does not lie in the kind of agrarian economy that emerged, that paradigm of development or state formation that emerged in 1966. Rural incomes don't come from agriculture anywhere in the country. Majority of the rural incomes come from non-farm economy. Not more than 30% of rural households depend on agriculture. They always have something else to also, in some sense, add to their incomes. So that was the reason why Modi thought that, you know, they could push these reforms, because there are not many people who would be there to support you know, in that sense, that anti-reform lobby in Punjab. But at the same time, Punjab can't afford to not think out of box. And I think this provides that kind of signal to us that average person understands those dynamics and they are experimenting. And I think they also understand that they are experimenting. And some people said, I heard them speak, that if these people don't perform in the next 5 years, we will throw them out as well. And they would also know, very soon they will get to know, if they don't know, that just with populist policies, they can't sustain their power. They will have to deal with the fact that there's no money in Punjab. There are no taxes available. Most of the money goes in payment of old debts. And how do you deal with Punjab bureaucracy? How do you deal with Punjab police? It's not going to be very easy to reform them. These institutions have been corrupted over decades, particularly since 1980s. How are you going to reform those police officers? It's going to be a big struggle, but if they are able to reform them, I think that will make a difference. I think we should kind of also think of it as a moment of hope, but at the same time, I think cynicism of Ronki and Ashutosh, and to some extent also of Kumool, is understandable.
Yeah, I mean, sorry if I may carry on. I mean, do you see the point that maybe AAP will be able to perform on certain fronts, for example, administrative and service changes in service delivery and so forth, while it might struggle on the broader issues such as economic development and the major need for transformation. So it's in that sense, looking at the Delhi model, whether it can bring about short-term relief to the citizenry of Punjab in terms of the services from which they are suffering a huge deficit, while the bigger issues can perhaps be built up and addressed step by step, because that, turning the economics of Punjab around are not going to be very easy, even for a party in one term, let alone 2 terms.
Well, I think that's not possible. I mean, Punjab is not Delhi. Delhi is a city-state which has a lot of money. All said and done, Delhi generates a lot of income. Punjab doesn't do that. If you have to have some kind of employment opportunities in Punjab, if you employ them in the state sector, you'll have to pay them salaries. Where are you going to get that money from? So you would have to straight away think on all these fronts. That is simply not possible in case, yes, a little bit of, this soft thing. But after some time, people will get used to, driving license, you don't have to pay bribe. But how does that matter? So people get used to those kinds of freebies and they think they take them for granted. So the point is that even reforming bureaucracy is not going to be very easy. Reforming police administration in particular, which has been kind of completely, entrenched in Punjab, and it has been used to kind of earning a lot of money. That is not going to be. Tehsildars, the way you get your land registered, everyone kind of asks for a little bit of money. How the hell are you going to reform those things? They're not going to be very easy because they will have to directly confront the existing power structure. And that existing power structure has been cultivated by the Akalis. It was untouched by Amrinder. That was the main problem. And how are they going to be able to? And that is not simply a question of corruption. It's not simply a question of making things easier. I think it's a much more foundational structural problem because Punjab is not a rural and agrarian state any longer. Every village of Punjab is urbanized. I think if you go to any village, remotest village of Punjab, it's urban connected, it's globalized in many ways, imagination wise, in terms of its aspirations, in terms of its, all kinds of connections, physical connections. You have uncles living there, your children living there. So your overall kind of, approach to life is not at all agrarian or rural any longer, anywhere, across any community.
Okay, I want to ask colleagues from Punjab and Chandigarh and how they see the challenges before AAP and whether they can be addressed, or do they share the pessimism, or perhaps they share the pessimism of what Sandeep said, is that this is a protest vote and it might well fizzle out in the next 4 or 5 years if the promises are not delivered on and delivered on very quickly.
You see that
Ronki?
what Surinder is saying, that corruption is somewhere, we are trying to find. It's a symptom, not that disease itself. The rot is in the system. You're trying to remove corruption while making those changes on the surface. Until unless something is done where corruption can't take place, you're trying to simplify the system where you need not to run after the babus. You need not to, go towards higher ups and some political, societies to get the thing done. So now mostly it's a question of making system, somewhere change. How come a system can be changed, is a major question. Here I try to make an additional point. You see that you can't make a change, simply in isolation of the rest of the, administrative setup. Punjab is in debt. That Punjab often saying that we are not getting proper share of the collection of the taxes which is being done in Punjab. So we need some system where many talks about cooperative federalism, where we try to look for, the state should get enough support. So is it the question of states individually to develop, to come out of the quagmire of all these things, or there would be somewhere, some other players, some other actors, I'm talking about the center, they can also join hands to help. These are the issues. For example, in Punjab, some issues, until unless you try to tackle them, industry often said cannot possible in Punjab because of border state, borderland state, who would invest in Punjab, all based as a fear of insurgencies. These are the all alibis. These are all, trying to evade the issues. Punjab need industry, but Punjab board need industry of a hardcore type. You need agro industry. Who stopped you to develop that agro industry? Where the source lies to develop industry? Why not you can have industry which is conducive to the Punjab setup? We are often trying to bulldoze people, shift from wheat and rice to go to other section. We have obtained some level of specialization in growing wheat. Do we not need wheat in the country? If somebody needs pulses, if somebody needs cash crops, let it be grown in Madhya Pradesh, other places. Why do you ask Punjab for that? So the question would be, here we need something to be done, and that needs to be done while going out of all these freebies sort of politics and giving the promises. Now, this election, whether it's a discontent vote or something else, people at present realized that the greed for the pelf, the greed for helping their dear and near is unsatiable across the ruling class. Their only interest is to fill their coffers, number one. Number two, the whole political class is playing somewhere a friendly match. They try to talk a lot, but once they come into power, they never take any action. So that people trying to, this is a great verdict to that extent. So people have understood it, despite the fact that they were cultivated for 10 odd years by the BJP and the Akali alliance in terms of giving them freebies. They were cultivated by 5 years by the Congress, but Congress did not do. Lastly, they tried to make them owners of their land within the Lal Dora system. They tried to give them plots, everything. People, they accepted it. But they say the answer to their grievances, the problem did not lie there. They want something. So here we need something more. So how you can attempt that? It's a very, very serious challenge. We have to look into which party would remain, which party would be changed. These are the things which will carry on and going on. But the question was this: how long people can beat this? How long? If you can try to compare Punjab with the period in the before, suddenly we find that in 1799 a kingdom was made. From 1738 onwards till 1799, that was a period, the most turbulent period in the history of Punjab, the more desperate period. Discontent was there. Don't we find people's effort but at the highest level? Don't we see Charta Singh? Don't we see Justice Singh Ahluwalia, Justice Singh Ramgarhia, and other generals? They're coming forward. They're trying to fight two forces: invaders from outside and repression within the system. They did it. They came out of that. That's the heritage culture of this region. So we should have a hope. The answer would come. And this election is just one reminder. People are not going to accept the things as they are. They are trying to do through ballot. They're trying to do while teaching them lessons. For them, the question lies in sustaining Punjab as such. They want, and a hope is there in Punjab very much. And this hope would always be there. And that hope was there when Baba Nanak, Guru Baba Nanak saw Saidpur being destroyed by Babur. And at that time, the hope was still there. He built a new social revolution in this region. So I think we should have a hope.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on to the other contributors in a minute, but I think one point I'd just like to make is that in the discussion that we've had and the observations that have been made about Punjab and Punjab's economy, one thing that's been overlooked is the origins of the fiscal deficit from the militancy period and how that's overshadowed the 2 decades of regionalism which have operated under the Akali Dal and the BJP. And it's interesting that the 3 states in Indian Union which are most indebted are Kerala, West Bengal, and Punjab. And it's no coincidence that they are, on the peripheries of the Indian Union. It's perhaps there's some, needs to be some serious analysis of how the centre has dealt with these states in terms of the fiscal deficit. Okay, now I invite Kumool for any observations on some of the points that we've made. Sorry.
You're muted, Kumool. You have to unmute yourself. Can't hear you.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, you are good, Dr. Abbi.
Your mic is mute. Now you're okay.
No, Kumool, we can't hear you again. I think you have to take off your earphones.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
And now you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Now there are a lot of expectations from this government. There's certain euphoria in the election, the results, and there is an expectation that it will be providing a solution to many issues. And this has happened with many governments before, say, for example, Rajiv Gandhi government in 1984, or for example, the Akali Dal Man when it won in 1989. So there is a fizzling out that took place and expectations were not able to be met. Now the expectation level is very huge because the issues are very large at hand. Now there has been a kind of a coalition that has taken place, but the interests of the farmers, the interests of the Dalits, the interests of the middle class would always not be the same. There will always be contradictions coming up, and how the party, the Aam Aadmi Party, deals with these issues are very, very important. They are very important because the farmers' agitation, it is just temporarily, at the moment, it's taking a temporary break. The bills have only been withdrawn, but there are many issues which have not been resolved. Then, as Professor Gurharpal and Professor Jodhka have talked about, the agrarian issue itself, agrarian crisis was never resolved. It's a very big crisis which the government in power would face. How to solve the agrarian crisis, which is very endemic. Then, of course, when we are looking at the issue of center-state relations, which are very important, about the relationship Punjab would have with the center, particularly after this agitation. After this agitation, Punjab will not necessarily be very subservient to the center, and the issues how the AAP leadership deals with this issue in terms of being a contradiction in terms of it being trying to have national aspirations and how it's Punjab unity is, because there would always be a contradiction in terms of how people have talked about Kejriwal as a Chota Modi or certain kind of aspirations. So here there will be a crisis. Then issue of governance is very important, and then there is a contradiction between state limit and state unit and national politics, and of course the issue of deficit and the issue of aspirations of minorities. And there is an issue that came up yesterday about whether the photograph of Maharaja Ranjit Singh should be removed or not. So we have this Sikh Panthik space also as Satnam is talking about, which might also see its space. Then, of course, we have the BJP playing a role and the Hindu expectations. So there is a whole lot of expectations, and what the government would be able to fulfill. That is, is the question mark, and how it does it, that depends on how it would be able to reach a particular point. So I would feel that it has to go slowly. The things have to go slowly, but whether they will be able to retain the euphoria, whether they will be able to retain that euphoria of the win, that is very difficult to say. And itself, lastly, the question of how successful Bhagwant Maan, there's a different thing to talk in terms of songs, there's a different thing to talk in terms of picturization or images, but how he will be strong within the Aap party, whether there are contradictions, because as his its election, his what is it called, swearing in ceremony itself created a lot of controversy, and it was again pointed out by many analysts that this is again like any other party. The distinctiveness of Aap, it is to some extent, somewhere fading away. And small things would make it like a regular party. And when we have routinization of charisma or regularization of charisma, there can be issues. So I am optimistic about it, but I'm not too hopeful about it.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you very quickly one question which intrigued me is the kind of, you hit on it in your last point about charisma and how Maan conducts himself, namely, listening to him the other day during the inauguration ceremony, he seemed exceptionally humble and all-embracing and very ease in his communication, his mode of communication, and in a way that, for example, Captain Amrinder Singh was always uncomfortable in talking to the populace, and then the Badals often talk down to the people, even though they pretended to be humble. So I wonder whether you can say something about this cultural side of Maan's personality. I say this because we have a world crisis in Ukraine. We have a comedian, resisting tyranny on a global scale. Might there be any parallels in this, in Bhagwant Maan, in performing a role which might be bigger than we see at the moment?
Yes, because you have made a very interesting and a very good observation. Very impressed with that. Yes, Bhagwant Maan is a comedian. He's not only a comedian, he's a satirist. And he has critiqued the Punjabi society with his wit and humor. You see, so in a society where there is no hope, where there is a hopelessness, there is despair, it is this kind of a comedian who has a role to play. That he has the role to play, that he can critique the society, and you can laugh and enjoy, and you can also feel that, you can pass that moment of pain with a little bit of joy. But at this moment, you see, he has all these qualities in him, but that was okay when he had nothing to lose. But at this moment, he has a chief minister's chair. So at times, you see, when the electorate expects that thing from him, that despite the fact that he has all these things, and he must also have the formula to succeed. So if he's able to do it, it would be wonderful, because he has to connect with the masses. That connect is related to his humor, sense of humor, his understanding of issues. If you see his, he used to play the character called Jugnu. So he used to talk about, the problem of school teachers, problem of corruption, all these issues he has raised. And, in a very tongue-in-cheek way. He understands the system in and out. He has a connect with the people. He has a kind of identity with the common people. He has hold on the pulse of the people. But how the bureaucracy, his own party, allows him to become successful, become larger than life, even larger than Kejriwal, that all would depend. So I think as a humorist, he has an added advantage. A humorist, a son of the soil, he has an added advantage. And in the times of despair, a person with all his additional talents is very useful.
Thank you. I want to turn to Ashutosh, and if you could say something about how you think the BJP at the center might deal with AAP in Punjab. I mean, how do you see this panning out? Because governments in Delhi have always had some level of difficulty with the governments in Punjab, whether they be of the same party or of an opposite party. But it seems to me that both at the center, the AAP will, the BJP will fear AAP's growth into other states, as Pramod outlined, and also on particular issues, it seems that the BJP will take a hardline approach to AAP in terms of performance on certain indicators.
You are very right, Professor Gurharpal Singh. I think when Prime Minister Modi came to Punjab, his prime attack was on Aam Aadmi Party, because Congress is in a state of decline, and Aam Aadmi Party had always a national ambition. You remember, like 2014, Arvind Kejriwal went all the way to Banaras to contest against Narendra Modi, who was the prime ministerial candidate of the BJP. So obviously, Aam Aadmi Party would like to make a case of itself in Punjab. They would like to make some difference in Punjab, and then they would like to showcase Punjab in other states, especially in the smaller states where they can have a controlled kind of environment, laboratory-like situation. Like Himachal is coming up for election later this year. So they would like to showcase their achievement in Punjab. And Punjab is in such a sorry state of affairs that if they can do something, that would be, I mean, like Kejriwal can become like a Nitish Kumar in Bihar, the way Nitish Kumar emerged as a leader at the national level after doing some reform in Bihar. So this can be challenged, and that's why I think that Arvind Kejriwal would be very much interested in Punjab affairs. Whether it would be taken kindly by Punjabis themselves, that is something which only time would say. And also, like last 5 years, we have seen that whenever there have been an interference from the Delhi, like last election 2017, as somebody pointed it out, that Aam Aadmi Party was in a very good space, but Durgesh Pathak and Sanjay Singh, the Delhi Walas, this type. So Punjab has a very distinct regional identity, very strong regional identity. So it would be very difficult for Arvind Kejriwal to directly interfere. But at the same time, I have the hunch that he would very much like to interfere in the affairs. As far as the BJP is concerned, BJP would be slightly concerned about Aam Aadmi Party, but then BJP would be very happy if the Congress continues to decline. Because Aam Aadmi Party, if you see around the states, having presence, it doesn't have even a footprint in many states. Most of the states, it doesn't have a footprint. So just to expect that because of its victory in Punjab, Aam Aadmi Party would be acceptable to other states, that would be something too far-fetched. I just wanted to say something about Green Revolution. I think that Punjabis were, they were really, they have a genuine case of grievance, because Green Revolution was a technological solution to the food crisis. And it was very well known. I mean, I remember Yogendra Alagh had come to Punjab University, and I had asked this question, that since you are an agricultural expert and so many experts were there, you must have foreseen that this kind of Green Revolution strategy, that massive subsidies and giving electricity, subsidized electricity and all, would ruin, and also forcing inducing Punjabi farmers to go for paddy cultivation, which is not suitable for the Punjab climate. It would really destroy Punjab in the long term. He said yes. I mean, he didn't say yes. He said that Mrs. Gandhi came from US after meeting LBJ, and she said, "Meri naak mitti mein mila di hai." That was exactly the word Yogendra Alagh used, that "Meri naak mitti mein mila di hai." So we have to make India self-sufficient in food terms. That is after 1967-68 food crisis. So that is how, and then Punjab is in such a sorry state of affairs because of that Green Revolution strategy. And they made Punjab a one-sector economy. So there the Punjabis have a genuine grievance against the center. So that is something that instead of going for political solution, land reforms and all, they went for a technological solution, which was always, doomed right from the beginning.
Okay, Surinder, you had your hand up, and in addition to responding to anything you're going to say, can I ask you to respond to a question from Harjit Gariwal, namely, what the AAP can do to reform and diversify the economy and move away from agriculture. So a lot on your plate.
Yeah, that's precisely what I was going to comment on. I think the relationship between Delhi and Punjab should be seen at two levels. One is the political relationship that BJP would want to have with AAP, and the other one is a systemic relationship. And I think at the systemic level, AAP is not very different from BJP in the sense that it doesn't talk about politically solving problems of regions. It would also think in terms of governance models that would solve problems of regions, and that in some sense should work with the neoliberal thinking of the central government. And I think at that level, we don't really know. Also, Kejriwal very kind of loudly said that we would work very actively with the central government as far as questions of national security are concerned on the border. So there is a kind of, much more complicated question. BJP knows that it can't come to power in Punjab on its own. And at some level, it would know the only way that it can come to power is initially they were thinking of, 32% SC vote and, 40% Hindu vote, and that together will make a very good combination. That's only a kind of very naive demographic logic. But I think on ground, they know that it will be very difficult for them to come to power on their own. And all said and done, Akalis are not of their taste. That's why they kind of were very happy to say them goodbye. Politically, they may want because there's no other party that they can align with. So I think at systemic level, even the Hindu right might find AAP to be a kind of convenient partner at the regional level in Punjab, better than certainly Akalis on their own or any other regional Panthic party emerging in the region, which would pose different kind of problems. So Punjab is actually a very serious question for the union government at a policy level, at a broader national security level as well. And the way union government and the BJP thinks, it would want to work out some kind of solution. That is where I think the question that you raised about fiscal debt of Punjab, this is where I think if AAP is smart enough and if they can hire some intelligent professionals who can then negotiate with people who are managing finances at the union level, and they can get this worked out. Akalis didn't care. They would have been able to work it out with Manmohan Singh and it could have been waived off, and it's not very difficult. I mean, union government has a huge money and it's not really going to help them in any way. And if Punjab takes off, it also at some level helps the national government. So I think at systemic level, I think this is a good opportunity for the central government to engage and deal with questions of Punjab. And given that, AAP has this kind of a mandate, and at ground level, there is so much of discontent. And then, farmers may again end up being in Delhi, and they have seen that, Punjabi political agency that Ashutosh was also talking about is not to be taken lightly. I think given all those situations, this is a situation which can be, in some sense, used in multiple ways by different actors.
I think, can I come in just like this?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to say that for BJP, I think I completely agree with Surinder that BJP would not like to, they would like to play safe. Two factors. One, that Punjab doesn't matter electorally so much. Punjab has only 13 seats in the Lok Sabha. And BJP knows it very clearly that at most they can win 2 or 3 seats. So in ruthless calculation, I mean, this, they are full machine party. So they would not really like to be very ambitious about Punjab. That's first. Second, Punjab is a borderland state and Punjab has had a troubled past. So no party, not the Congress, neither the Congress nor the BJP, they would like to disturb the peace in Punjab. So I mean that kind of, but then at the same time, I would say, and I said in my presentation also, that I don't think that Akali Dal and BJP are going to be together. I think BJP would like to contest on its own. They may go for an alliance with the smaller parties, but not with the Akali Dal, because they never gained, they rather lost out by their alliance with Akali Dal. And as I said, that the Punjab is an exception, because in all other states, BJP has gained by making an alliance with a regional party. But here they probably lost out even their urban support base.
Okay, thank you. Can I, Surinder, come back to you about the diversity question, which you missed out on?
No, another point that I was trying to make on the point that Ashutosh is, see, RSS is very anxious about national relationship with the Sikhs. It doesn't want to put Sikhs on the other side. So there is a possibility that BJP might be compelled to go for an alliance with Akalis, and that in some sense covers them up in some way or the other. What was the diversity question you were saying? What sense?
This was a question from Harjit about what the AAP can do to diversify Punjab's economy away from agriculture. I mean, this is a perennial question.
Yeah. No, that was the point I was earlier making, that for Punjab to stabilize, it would need to deal with the questions of its economy. And the way union government in the neoliberal kind of framework wants to think would be to diversify Punjab's economy. And agriculture is anyway getting marginalized in the larger picture of Punjab economy. We even want to think about agriculture as a different kind of cultural, what one should say, attraction in Punjab. Everyone is an agriculturist at some level in Punjab, even though we would have never been to fields at some level. We also feel solidarity for farmers of Punjab. So that is one cultural kind of context, but on ground in terms of economic value of agriculture, it has been consistently declining, and there is no hope that it would grow further. I think the point that Ronki was making is very important, that we need to industrialize perhaps in a specific way. Every region needs to industrialize in specific ways, but that specific way also has its own limitations. So you would need to diversify Punjab agriculture, and then for that you would need to look for various other options. Very recently, union government people have been talking about improving relationship with Pakistan, quite interestingly. And that would be an interesting kind of lever, that how do we, in some sense, open up borders, which can be very beneficial for Punjab agriculture as well. And that opens markets to the Gulf and to other parts of Central Asia. And I think that is a very important point to make. So the possibilities that you have in Punjab are obviously Punjab specific to some level. To some level, they have to be innovative. At another level, they have to be kind of the way other parts of India have developed. Punjab has very good urban clusters, like even this Chandigarh, Mohali, Zirakpur, and now New Chandigarh and Panchkula. This is a huge urban cluster. Ludhiana is a huge urban cluster. From Jalandhar to Amritsar is a huge urban cluster. So similarly, this whole GT road belt is so huge urban cluster. So there are all kinds of possibilities that exist in Punjab. Until 1980s, Punjab was a leading industrial urban state of the country. Industry declined in Punjab after the 1980s because of partly Khalistan movement and partly, the government that came to Punjab was so corrupt, and they did not allow the local entrepreneur to flourish there. They had to run away because of corruption, because of systemic issues. Yes, if they are able to deal with those systemic issues, lots of new possibilities will emerge from within. Many people in diaspora don't want to invest in Punjab because the state system is so rigid. It's impossible to enter Punjab economy.
Can I take?
Okay. Yeah, you have to be very brief. We're running out of time, so we have to end, I think, soon. Yeah.
I come to your point. You say that how Bhagwant Man, sounds, how he can manage. To see, you try to see, it's not a question of regional party. You can have a quick, glance over immediately after independence, till 1967. Then after that, till that this government has ended up. We find that Congress in Punjab never tried to, represent an independent position vis-a-vis the Congress at the center. It was for the first time that when Captain Amarinder Singh tried to show that, as an independent face, to 2017, he was sent to power because it was Amarinder Singh's Congress not the Indian National Congress as such. When he tried to say that I won't allow such things to happen and try to assert the will of the people of Punjab, people will stand with him. Now the question comes, whatever Aam Aadmi Party is going to do, it all depends how Bhagwant Mann would be able to assert, while getting the confidence of all his ministers and MLAs, that here what we need to find a solution independent of any other, what is happening in Delhi or not. Because people brought him, they brought him Bhagwant Mann, and they want him to address the issues. So here, if he tries to address the issues while getting rooted in Punjab, then automatically all the support which is there as a default would become his legitimate, mandate position. So all depends upon how they would try to, how would they like to, because if he tries to become, any other, like his predecessors looking toward Delhi, probably, once Akali started looking towards that, people come to know that they were there to support, such some of the laws, 3 laws. People, they lost faith in them. Similarly, the things went against Captain. Although that Samaj Kisan Morcha, Sanjukt Kisan Morcha and Sanjukt Samaj Morcha, if in election it did not do, but the question was that why people, rallied behind them, because the question was that they were raising the issues of Punjab. So I want to say, this is the point. Regional party is the one which represent the regional feelings of people. You cannot be a regional party simply in the name of that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ronki. And is anyone left who's got a burning question? We must really end this fascinating webinar now. And I want to thank, firstly, I want to thank Arvind and Alex for organizing the event. And then, of course, my heartfelt thanks to everyone who's participated as a panelist from UK, India, US, and it's great to connect with you guys. I guess I've been out of it for about 6 years as a senior administrator, but it's wonderful to connect with people in Punjab and in Delhi. It's almost like old times. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your help, support, and the effort that you've made in making this event, such a memorable one for me, at least. And thank you to the attendees. We've tried to answer most of your questions, and I think many of your queries and questions have been answered in the discussion. And if we haven't done justice to your questions, then perhaps there will be another occasion. I'll now hand back to Arvind, our primary host, and he will say a few words. Thank you, Arvind.
Yes, thank you so much, Gurharpal. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. I just realized it's past 11 o'clock at night in India, and I know you must be very tired. Thank you for staying up. It's wonderful of you to do this on relatively short notice as well. This discussion was fascinating, and I hope we can host you for another session, maybe a little earlier next time. But hosting it at that time in India, we lose the West Coast audience over here as well. So it's a bit of a fine sort of thing we have to play. But anyway, please do join us for our next symposium, which will be in September. That's going to be on the Indian partition, and Ian Talbot and Gurharpal will be spearheading that. We should have a very, very interesting set of speakers. Other than that, thank you to everybody, and we will remain in touch and look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.